A cruise ship filled with high school students is attacked by terrorists. On the ship, we see our main character, Amamiya Hiroto, desperately trying to save a female student who is falling into the sea, only to wake up and find himself, along with his entire class from Yasaka High School, in an endless void. They are now dead. As the students try to make sense of their situation, we see a male student, Machida Aran, complaining about his unfortunate death, wishing he could have had a little more fun with girls. Almost immediately, he tries to hit on a female student, Shimada Izumi, but she flatly rejects him, and quickly takes control of the situation, trying to ease the tension and bring everyone back to reality. She is supported by another male student. Minami Asagi speaks up, urging his classmates to remain calm, even though they have no idea what the future holds. However, it's not enough to lift everyone's spirits, as their homeroom teacher, Murakami Junbei, remarks on the students' strange attitude towards their own deaths. While those two argue, Hiroto spots the girl he risked his life to save, Naruse Narumi. He feels bitter about his attempt to save her, because in the end, they both died anyway. He admits they weren't close, but that didn't mean he wanted her to die. Just then, the students hear a booming voice. A male student, Rokudoi Hijiri, sees a brilliant light appear before them, which gradually materializes into a divine being named Rodkoft. The students Tsucha Kanako and Konde Miyagi panic, but thankfully Izumi manages to calm them down. Rodkoft tells the class that he will grant each of them a special power, a new life somewhere other than Earth, and their own personal fortune. Hearing this excites Hiroto, as it's the first time he's ever heard of reincarnation. Rodkoft continues, explaining that anyone who wishes to remain on Earth may do so, but they won't receive a special power, and their memory of this empty space will be erased. He asks if anyone wants to stay on Earth. As Hiroto weighs the pros and cons of being reincarnated, he believes that being reborn in another world with powers is definitely better than staying on Earth. However, one of the students disagrees with his line of thinking, and chooses to remain on Earth. Fortunately, everyone else chooses to be reincarnated with superpowers. One by one, the god begins to call the students' names to grant them their special powers and transport them to another world. Hiroto feels it will be a while until his turn, so he sits down and reflects on his life. He admits that his life was rather unimpressive. His parents died when he was young. He had no friends or siblings and no one close to him while growing up. The worst part was his relatives on his father's side, who he figured wouldn't care if he died and would probably be happy to collect his life insurance money. However, none of that bothers Hiroto much. Instead, he starts thinking about a better life in the new world, with a loving and caring family. Just then, Rodkoft calls out the name Amamiya Hiroto, and a boy steps forward. Hiroto thinks to himself that he's never noticed that student before, and realizes the name is strangely similar to his own. It's not just the name, even the other boy's appearance is eerily identical to his. Rodkoft grants the other boy 8 special orbs of light, far more than any of the previous students, and prepares to cast the spell to transfer the entire class to the new world, until he realizes that Hiroto is still standing there. Rodkoft asks for his name, and he answered, Amamiya Hiroto. This made the god realize he had made a terrible mistake, as he had confused Amamiya Hiroto with our protagonist. Not only that, but Rodkoft had given all the special powers to the wrong person. He explained that he couldn't take back the powers he'd granted, and a worried Hiroto asked if he would have to start from square one like before. Rodkoft replied that it was more complicated than that. The god went on to explain that he was supposed to have saved Hiroto's life, but fate had been so cruel that now his life would never be blessed. Basically, Hiroto felt there was no reason to be reincarnated anymore, and asked to be returned to Earth. But the god said that chance was gone, and that his time to be reincarnated was running out. Hiroto was furious and complained that he was the only one in his class who didn't receive anything, and now his life was destined to be filled with misfortune. However, Rodkoft explained that he would be compensated by turning Hiroto's soul into an empty core. Inside that core, instead of powerful abilities, it would hold magic. However, Rodkoft also warned that his affinity for magic was extremely low, which angered Hiroto even more since he would basically be born with the capacity for magic, but be unable to use any of it. Rodkoft pitied Hiroto as he couldn't grant him any luck, and said his life would be filled with hardships. Finally, the god offered a few optimistic words before beginning Hiroto's reincarnation process. Hiroto woke up to the sensation of a powerful electric shock surging through his body, and a guard was mocking him for trying to resist. The guard mentioned another experiment was about to take place, and then left, leaving Hiroto with a moment. to remember memories from his past life, and to curse the god who put him in this situation. Hiroto realized he had been reincarnated into a new world called Origin, a world quite similar to Earth, but one that combined science and magic. In this life, his mother was a prostitute and his father was an alcoholic. They both sold him for a small amount of money. Not long after being sold, he was bought by a shady research organization that conducted illegal experiments. In short, Hiroto was living the worst life imaginable. The story moves forward to a scientist discussing an unusual subject, catching the attention of two men. They noted that his magic affinity was extremely low and that overall he had no magical talent whatsoever. The scientist explained that normally a person possesses one of 7 elements: earth, water, fire, wind, light, life, and space. However, Hiroto had no aptitude for any of them. One of the scientists deemed Hiroto useless and suggested they dispose of him. However, another scientist spoke up against it, arguing that even though Hiroto had no affinity for the common elements, he possessed a massive amount of magical power within his body. They theorized that he might not have discovered his element yet. The scene shifts and we see Hiroto conducting an experiment, using magic on a dead rat, trying to revive it. This astonishes the scientists, and they conclude that his element is the manipulation of the dead, also known as the death element. The two scientists congratulate him on becoming the first death mage. Afterward, Hiroto is summoned to an office model, where he was surprised to receive an offer involving some degree of freedom, on the condition that he agreed to become a test subject. The man explained that the research facility had very high expectations for his death magic, and if he could develop a new type of magic, he would be set free. A few days passed, and Hiroto poured all his effort into creating a new type of magic in exchange for his freedom, much to the scientist's delight. However, one of the scientists grew anxious due to the speed of Hiroto's progress. Another scientist reassured him that there was nothing to worry about, as they had planted a bomb inside his body, just in case he got any ideas. Not only that, but they also installed a GPS, replaced his right eye with a special camera, and implanted secret recording devices in his ears and mouth. They even restricted his food intake to prevent him from becoming too powerful, and only allowed him to leave his room for experiments. In other words, they had complete control over his body and knew his every move. Despite these thorough precautions, the scientists still felt uneasy because Hiroto could use his magic at will, which could become a threat in the future. The scientist with glasses mocked his colleague for being overly cautious, but also asked if he had any solutions. Later, Hiroto entered a strange room and asked about the experiment to develop his new magic. One of the scientists said that before that they were going to run a quick check on his body. Hiroto complied and lay down on the examination table. Before Hiroto was strapped down tightly to the table, he demanded to know what was going on, but a team of doctors entered the room and began to operate. The surgery seemed to go well, as a scientist told Hiroto it was time to eat. However, Hiroto noticed he couldn't move or speak. Another scientist entered the room to check on Hiroto's condition, while his colleague gloated about the successful surgery. Now, Hiroto had no control over his own body, and his magic was completely sealed away. The scene changes to Hiroto, confined to a wheelchair. The scientist with glasses rejoiced that they now had complete control over Hiroto, while his colleague mocked him, saying that Hiroto was the first god of death who could control death, but not his own body. Reduced to a mere puppet, Hiroto thought about his desperate situation and tried to call for help, but he could do nothing, and had to endure this for 10 long years. Years later, the scientist with glasses led another scientist into Hiroto's containment room. This man was shocked to see the near catatonic state Hiroto was enduring. However, what excited him more was the chance to uncover the secrets of a god of death and potentially surpass his predecessors. Meanwhile, Hiroto began to see the spirits of a woman, a little girl, and a dog. The woman started talking to Hiroto, and the little girl turned to ask the scientist if he was the new person in charge of Hiroto's experiments. Hiroto told them that these scientists were terrible people, and that his life had become unbearable. The woman apologized for not being able to help him, and wondered if there was any way they could help him escape. But Hiroto just thanked them for simply being with him in such a terrible place. The woman replied that she was glad and thanked him for helping them calm down, with the little girl explaining that they couldn't pass on and were just drawn here one day. Hiroto speculated that it might be because of his death magic. Since he could see spirits, he might have unintentionally summoned them. The little girl went on to explain that there were many spirits wandering the facility, and all of them were fond of Hiroto and hoped he would one day escape this place. But since they were only spirits, there was nothing they could do to help him. At that moment, Hiroto began to remember his old classmate Narumi, the girl he had tried to save on the ship. He thought about how all of them had been granted powers by the gods, but not a single one had come back to save him. Meanwhile, the young scientist was frustrated for not having gathered enough results in the past month and feared he would be kicked out of his position. He got angry and pushed Hiroto out of his wheelchair, causing the woman's spirit to rush over to help him. In his desperation, the scientist began typing furiously on his computer, hoping to release Hiroto's limits and allow him to reach his full potential. Hiroto started to go into shock, and the spirits of the dog and the little girl tried to stop it, but they could only pass through him, unable to do anything. The scientist slowly realized the terrifying scale of Hiroto's energy, and understood that he was 10,000 times stronger than the most powerful mage on Earth. However, while the experiment was still ongoing, Hiroto went into shock and died on the floor. The young scientist panicked when he realized he had accidentally killed a test subject and turned away, just as a black mist began to pour out of Hiroto's body. This dark aura immediately set off the monitoring equipment, and the scientist saw that Hiroto's power was still rising relentlessly. He became ecstatic with this new discovery. However, before he could say anything more, Hiroto grabbed the scientist by the neck and began to squeeze, choking the life out of him. Before letting the scientist's corpse drop to the floor, Hiroto began to laugh loudly, thrilled by his newfound freedom. He had not only regained his body, but his magic as well. Hiroto wasted no time, immediately punching straight through another man as he ran out of the cell. He approached the two scientists who were responsible for the loss of his body and magic. Both were stunned, unable to comprehend how he could move. Meanwhile, the only thing on Hiroto's mind was killing them for the suffering they had caused him over the past 10 years. One of the two scientists started firing a gun at Hiroto, but he easily dodged the bullets and drained the man of his life force. The remaining scientist quickly realized that Hiroto had been dead for a while, and that very fact had allowed him to use death magic to its fullest extent, turning him into an unstoppable undead mage. This realization excited the scientist, and he praised Hiroto for this achievement. But just before he could finish speaking, Hiroto decapitated him, ending everything in an instant. Hiroto laughed, realizing that his massacre had only just begun. He turned to the doctors who had operated on him 10 years ago, mercilessly impaling them with their own medical instruments. Hiroto continued to escape the facility, effortlessly dodging the bullets flying towards him, while feeling a rush of excitement as he gained complete control over his own magic. Then, he discovered a large door and believed there were survivors inside. Hiroto used his magic to open the door and entered a room full of test subjects. He realized that this facility was trying to recreate another death mage through these people. Hiroto restored the children's ability to move and led them outside, before saying he would go on ahead to check for any enemies. Hiroto continued forward and opened the door leading outside, where he saw all of his former classmates, who he believed were there to rescue him. He moved toward them, but they quickly took a defensive stance and started shooting at Hiroto. Hiroto was completely stunned by this betrayal, as he thought they would remember he was once their classmate. The students stopped firing as they felt the battle was hardly a big deal, since they were told that an undead had escaped the facility. Asagi, who had once advised the class to keep their spirits up while they were alive, explained that the undead stood no chance against them, since they were 30 of the 100 strongest heroes in the world. Narumi, the girl Hiroto had tried to save on the ship, added that this person had wiped out everyone at the facility, and even called death magic disgusting. That's when Amamiya Hiroto stepped in and suggested that the undead simply wanted to die, since he had also been one of the facility's experiments. Narumi agreed. Hiroto immediately recognized the man with a name similar to his own. Narumi and Hiroto decided that they would end undead Hiroto's suffering, so they tried to destroy him with a powerful spell. As undead Hiroto was burning with rage, he resented the other Hiroto, who had stolen the good life, the luck, and all the blessings that God should have given him in this world. However, his anger wasn't just for the other Hiroto, but for all of his classmates, who all had good lives while he was left behind to suffer. He swore he would kill every last one of them. Narumi and Hiroto finished off zombie Hiroto and sent him back to the god, who had predicted that he wouldn't last long. As soon as Hiroto met the god again, he immediately tried to throw a punch, but it just passed through the god's intangible body. However, this didn't stop Hiroto from screaming, expressing his rage at being deceived in his second life. Rodkoff had told Hiroto that although his second life was miserable, the god would give him a better third life, which immediately caught Hiroto's attention. Rodkoff had told Hiroto that the next world would be called Lambda, which made Hiroto excited, thinking he would receive the first blessings this time. He urged the god to act quickly, but Rodkoff said that he couldn't receive any new abilities, and immediately sent him away. This made Hiroto furious, and he asked Rodkoff the reason behind this injustice, but the god simply replied that he couldn't have him wandering around killing his classmates. Rodkoff explained that this new world wasn't very developed, and it was basically up to Hiroto himself to build it from scratch. He also said to consider his second life in Origin as a training phase. But Hiroto vehemently objected, claiming it was nothing but hell on earth. He declared he would never forgive the god for what had happened. However, before Hiroto could finish his sentence, Rodkoff placed a curse on him and demanded he give up his desire for revenge. Only then would the god erase all the pain and suffering in his next life and return him to the normal cycle of reincarnation. Hiroto was reborn in Lambda and met an elf girl smiling down at him. She asked him to cry every once in a while, and that's when we see Hiroto, now called Vandalieu, as an infant elf. The next chapter begins with Vandalieu and his mother, Darcia, preparing a meal. He tries to get used to his new life in Lambda. Now that he's an elf child who can't speak, he then compares his appearance to his mother's, who explains that he inherited his looks from his father. We also learn more about the history of the world of Lambda. Here, elves look quite similar to humans, and he realizes his mother is a dark elf. However, he still wonders about his father, who isn't around. Although Vandalieu does things a child his age shouldn't be able to do, his mother never stops loving and praising him. This makes Vandalieu feel warm inside, because in his previous life he never knew what it felt like to be raised with such love. Vandalieu tries to get more praise from his mother by attempting to crawl, but he's still too young to do it. His mother wonders about his stats because of his early achievements, which confuses our protagonist. That's when a status screen appears before him. After reading it, he realizes he's half vampire, and assumes his father must be a vampire too. He starts thinking about the past few months since he was born, how no one has ever visited their home, a place that looks like a cave. He figures that because of his origins, people might be after him. He even thinks it's possible his father is already dead. Going back to the status window, he sees his magic points are maxed out, and tries to use a magic skill, but nothing happens. He returns to the status window and realizes that the god has placed a curse on him, preventing him from using any experience from his past lives. He also can't learn any jobs or gain experience. Vandalieu is devastated, but he refuses to just lie there and do nothing. He tries to find another way to learn magic. However, before Vandalieu can start experimenting with magic, his stomach starts to rumble. Darcia realizes it's time to feed him, which makes him feel a little embarrassed. His mother notices that his fangs have started to grow, so she butchers a rabbit right in front of Vandalieu and tells him to drink its blood. Surprisingly, he finds it quite tasty, though it's no match for his mother's milk. His mother warns him not to drink blood in public and to only do it when she's around. This makes Vandalieu realize the hardships his mother has been through while raising a half-vampire child, and he's grateful that she chose to stay with him instead of abandoning him. While his mother is trying to swat an annoying fly, Vandalieu uses his new ability, exterminating microorganisms, to kill the fly, and it earns him a lot of praise. Vandalieu realizes that in this world, he can still use death magic, and although he's very happy to have his mother by his side, he feels it's not enough. He resolves to seek more power to get his revenge. He understands that the god brought him to this world to help it develop, and knows that sooner or later, his other classmates will also appear in this new world. While he was deep in thought, his mother pinched his cheek and remarked that he didn't show much emotion. Vandalieu thought that this might also be part of the curse the god had placed on him. His mother then told him that she loved him, but she wondered if he could feel it. The next day, Vandalieu's mother took him to the front door to test if he had inherited the vampire's weakness to sunlight. Fortunately, he wasn't affected. His mother breathed a sigh of relief and took him outside for a walk, the two of them enjoying a peaceful time under the sun, which brought Vandalieu to tears. His mother hugged him and said that one day she would take him to her village so he could be free to do whatever he wanted. This made Vandalieu admit that he loved her, and this new feeling helped him realize the pain of not being able to show his true emotions. That night, Vandalieu thought about the dangers in his life and his desire to protect his mother. He hoped that one day, when he could speak, he would be able to tell her everything. But for a moment, he dreamed of a happy life with his mother and thought that if he could live like that, he wouldn't need a fourth life. Then he remembered what the god had told him before his reincarnation and decided that he would not die and live another life. He would rather live peacefully with his mother until the end of his days. The next day, his mother left him home alone to go to a nearby village to buy supplies. While she was gone, Vandelieu practiced his magic until she returned, but she never came back. Vandelieu woke up from a short nap and realized his mother still hadn't returned. He started to feel worried and thought about going out to find her. He prepared for the journey and used his magic to resurrect the rabbit with a death attribute spell, using a nearby wandering spirit and binding it to the rabbit's corpse to turn it into a zombie. However, he realized that one rabbit wouldn't be enough. So he used his magic to animate all the furniture in the house, turning them into his own little army of zombies, and headed out to find his mother. And used one of his skeletons to help him enter the town more discreetly. Using his magic, he infused spirits into the bricks to turn them into undead entities, opening a path for him to enter. After walking for a while, he came across a human spirit who said it had seen his mother in the town square, which made Vandelieu excited, and he quickly went to find her. It didn't take long for him to find his mother standing in front of a fountain, and he approached her. His mother turned around with a smile and revealed that she was now just a wandering spirit. Vandelieu was in complete shock. His mother apologized for not being able to come home to be with him, and Vandelieu asked what had happened. Your mother was surprised she could hear your voice, but she continued to explain that despite her best efforts to hide you, the church eventually found her and mercilessly killed her. She warned Vandelieu to run away, because you inherited your parents' ruby and violet eyes, which would reveal that you are a dhampir. However, Vandelieu refused to leave, and asked who had killed her. Your mother hesitated, but you used your enchantment ability to force her to tell the truth. Under your influence, your mother recounted that she was ambushed by Baron Bustereau's men, priests, along with a few adventurers. She fought with all her might, but a man called the Rainbow Blade stepped forward to fight her. Your mother admitted that she was captured and tortured by the church. The church members demanded she reveal where you were hiding, but she remained silent until the very end, when she was burned alive at the stake. This horrifying realization caused Vandelieu to gain a new skill: mind corruption. He realized he was the reason his mother died in such agony and was filled with regret, while his new skill immediately leveled up to level 2. Just then, the flies he was controlling with magic returned, and brought back information from various conversations around town. Many of them were people who had participated in his mother's murder, and were talking about how she deserved to die just for giving birth to a dhampir. They were even planning to throw a party to celebrate her death. A group of adventurers was also planning to hunt down and kill Vandelieu, in the same way they had done to his mother. All of these words fueled the rage within him, causing his skill to level up to 7. Vandelieu thought about the cruelty and disgust of the world, and how in each of his lives he could never have a normal life. Just then, his mother said she didn't have much time left and began to fade away. She said she wished she could watch you grow into a man and live a wonderful life. But the most important thing was for you to be happy. Meanwhile, Vandelieu's skill continued to level up, until it reached its growth limit. He then unleashed his power in an attempt to save his mother, and bound her soul to one of her remaining bone fragments. He swore that one day he would create a new body for her. With that vow, Vandelieu returned home, carrying a deep-seated hatred for those who killed his mother, and a determination to become stronger. Back home, Vandelieu sat quietly looking out the window. When his mother's spirit asked if he was awake, he replied that he was, and they talked about how tired they both were after their long journey. Vandelieu was so hungry he had to drink a raccoon dog's blood to survive. Vandelieu remembered the promise he swore to his mother, to create a new body for her, and affirmed that he would keep that promise one day. His mother, though only a spirit, vowed that she would always be by his side. Afterward, Vandelieu spoke with one of his skeletons, which he called Skeleton Monkey, and asked it to gather all of his undead forces for an important meeting. At the meeting, Vandelieu discussed their current situation. The Baron's knights and the town's priest were relentlessly scouring the forest, hunting for him. In particular, he stressed that 3 adventurers had found his home's location and were very likely on their way at that very moment. He calculated that he had about 30 skeletons in his undead army, and that if he planned carefully, he would have a chance of winning, though he was still unsure of the 3 adventurers' skills and abilities. Vandelieu then asked Skeleton Monkey to arm wrestle him to test his strength. And to his surprise, Vandelieu realized he was much stronger than he had initially anticipated. Meanwhile, the 3 adventurers were following his tracks through the forest. One of the group discovered large footprints from what they believed to be a monkey or a bear. However, the footprints were too shallow to belong to those animals, making another one wonder if there was some other creature in the forest they didn't know about. Even so, the group's leader dismissed that possibility, and the group continued on their journey until they found Vandelieu's house. One of the adventurers commented on the mess all around, raising the suspicion that the Baron's knights might have found the child before them. In a panic, the leader ordered the group to search the house. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet began to shake, causing the leader to fall down a slope. When he looked up, he was horrified to see an earth golem staring down at him. But that wasn't the worst of it. An undead army of skeletons began to rise from the ground. Terrified, the group of adventurers turned and fled. But the leader's leg got caught in a trap, something he mistook for a snake, but was in fact a living vine. Before his teammates could help him, a haunted frying pan knocked him unconscious. The earth golem slowly advanced and took down the adventurers. When they awoke, the three of them found themselves tied tightly to trees and gagged. Vandelieu appeared, riding on Skeleton Monkey's shoulders, approached them and asked if they were awake yet. The adventurers couldn't believe that such a small child was capable of controlling such a powerful undead army. They compared the power and energy radiating from Vandelieu and his army to that of the priest, Gordon, in town, and realized that Vandelieu and his undead army radiated a strange sense of purity, completely different from the priest. Vandelieu began to interrogate the adventurers, but since he couldn't speak clearly yet, he could only make babbling, childlike sounds, leaving the adventurers completely confused. To make up for his inability to speak, he used magic to write in English on the ground. But this only confused them more since they couldn't understand it. This confirmed Vandelieu's suspicion that the main language of this world was Japanese. He remembered his mother telling him about a time, many years ago, when the people of this world had to fight against a demon army, and the world's god summoned 7 warriors from other worlds to help them achieve victory. After sealing the demon lord, these 7 heroes passed down their language, Japanese, to this world. Vandelieu guessed that the adventurers also spoke Japanese, so he wrote on the ground again, this time in Japanese, and they were able to understand. Vandelieu demanded they reveal information about the baronet, and the leader replied that aside from ruling the town for the past 10 years, the baronet was just an ordinary noble. Vandelieu then asked about the Knight Order, but one of the adventurers answered that although they were well-trained, there was nothing special about them. He went on to ask about the priest, Gordon, and his holy knights. The adventurers explained that the priest and his followers had only moved to the town about a month ago, with the goal of finding the Damper child and its mother. This enraged Vandelieu. The adventurer continued, saying that Priest Gordon was famous for being a powerful vampire slayer, and that his strength was equivalent to a B-rank adventurer. One of the adventurers tried to negotiate with Vandelieu, even offering to cooperate and have his life spared if he didn't want to be captured by the priest. Vandelieu ordered one of the skeletons to release him. But just before the adventurer could thank him, the skeleton monkey grabbed his face, and Vandelieu began to drink his blood, until he collapsed, dead. He then reminded the remaining adventurers to only say what he wanted to know. Nothing more, nothing less. This reminder was enough to make the other adventurers obey him meekly. Vandelieu slowly came to understand that the leader of the iridescent sword party, a man named Heinz, was a B-rank swordsman, while the rest of the group were all C-rank. This meant that the toughest enemies he had to face were the priest and the leader, Heinz. The adventurers begged Vandelieu to spare their lives, but he simply told them to be quiet, and began to question why they were begging for their lives when they had mercilessly murdered his mother and left him an orphan. Vandelieu had decided their fate. They would become his food. 2 months passed, and we see Priest Gordon and his followers still searching for Vandelieu in the forest. One of his followers suggested that perhaps Vandelieu had escaped, or at the very least was already dead. Priest Gordon reminded the man that 3 D-rank adventurers had been sent to find the child, but had yet to return, and to this day, no one had found their bodies. The follower didn't believe an infant could do that to adventurers, but Priest Gordon thought otherwise. He believed that over time the Damper child would only grow stronger and become a real problem. His follower then argued that 2 months had passed since they began their search, and they still hadn't found the child, and they were slowly running out of resources while the villagers were starting to become unhappy. Priest Gordon admitted that he understood their situation, but he still felt it was necessary to find the child. The follower angrily shouted that there were other vampires harming the people, and that his duty was to protect the innocent. This began to shake Priest Gordon's conviction, and in the end he decided to give up his search for Vandelieu. The next day, we see Vandelieu enjoying the warm sunlight after months of hiding. 2 months ago, he had discussed with his mother where they could live. As they were currently on the Bangaia continent, and Milgu was one of the Amid Empire's settlements. This place had no love for vampires or their descendants, and they actively hunted such individuals. For this reason, Vandeleur didn't have many options for finding shelter, and even if he could find a safe place to stay, Vandeleur still couldn't rest until he and his mother's spirit were truly safe. Thinking of a temporary shelter, he decided that a large cave would be the best hiding place. Vandeleur ordered his earth golems to start digging a cave, and disguised it to look like it had collapsed to deceive his enemies. As he was doing so, he was suddenly attacked by the 3 spirits of the adventurers he had killed. These spirits, drawn by his power, now clung to him, being overly familiar to the point of making him uncomfortable. Desperate for his own space, he bound one of the spirits to an earth golem and ordered it to work on keeping the cave from collapsing. Meanwhile, the remaining spirits would continue digging until the very end. Over the next few days, he dug about 50 meters deep into the cave and thought he could survive there with enough food and water. However, half a month later, he realized he had run out of food and water, forcing him to survive on earthworms, and even accidentally flooded the cave while searching for water. After many long, miserable days, he wondered if he could go on like this, but finally, Vandeleur was able to return and see the sun. He staggered towards his undead army, but then stopped, looked up at the sky and wished that the iridescent blades and the priest Gordon were still alive, so he could kill him with his own hands. Afterward, Vandeleur began to train his army of skeletons, but suddenly realized that he had no idea how to train them. Since they were just walking skeletons, they didn't need to develop speed or strength, and they weren't good at using weapons either. He recalled how humans could improve their skills in this world, like swordsmen, farmers, and blacksmiths. From that, Vandeleur began to wonder how his undead could learn skills. Later, he happened to encounter a goblin, and ordered his army of skeletons to destroy it. Vandeleur figured that since undead were still a type of monster, they could gain experience by killing other monsters. And since he couldn't gain experience due to the god's curse, he would have to rely on his army for protection and to avoid having to hide again. After killing the goblin, his entire army of skeletons leveled up. And Vandeleur also reached level 3. He checked his status screen, confused as to how he could level up while still being cursed. Vandeleur determined that when his army leveled up, a portion of their experience was transferred to him. This helped him find a loophole in the god's curse. After burying the goblin's corpse, Vandeleur focused on leveling up. Skeleton Man, Skeleton Monkey, Skeleton Wolf, Vulture, and Bear as his main bodyguards. As time passed, Vandeleur turned 1 year old, and his mother and the skeleton army celebrated his birthday around a campfire. Vandeleur recalled his first life as Hiroto, and how his family never celebrated his birthday, because they thought it would make him weak. Back in the present, Vandeleur explained to his mother that he wasn't used to celebrating birthdays, but he was happy to finally have one with people who truly cared about him. He also shared that he could now speak normally without needing to use magic to communicate anymore. Vandeleur had even learned a new spell called Chant Cancel, which allowed him to cast spells without reciting an incantation, which surprised his mother. He also mentioned that during their training, his skeleton army had leveled up and evolved into bone monsters. His mother congratulated him and wondered if they could leave the forest, but Vandeleur said it wasn't the right time yet. However, he added that his army was now strong enough to get revenge, though he wasn't sure what to do after that since he was still in danger of being hunted for being a domper. Vandeleur concluded that he should hunt bandits to level up. At first, his mother was supportive, until she realized her son's true intentions and immediately objected. Vandeleur explained that even though they had killed many monsters, Bone Monkey and the other skeletons still hadn't leveled up, and he thought they needed to kill bandits to fix this. To him, killing criminals wasn't a bad thing, but his mother insisted it was too dangerous. Nevertheless, Vandeleur decided he would launch a surprise attack, and had already picked out a few bandits to start with. Elsewhere, a group of bandits was celebrating in a log cabin in the forest, drinking and talking. A subordinate informed the leader that some of their men had recently disappeared in the forest and suspected the local lord was involved. However, the leader just scoffed and dismissed it. Meanwhile, Vandeleur was standing on high ground, looking down at the cabin, and next to him was the spirit of the man, who had been murdered by the bandits earlier, the one who had led him here. The man begged Vandeleur to avenge him and his daughter, and Vandeleur agreed. He explained that over the past month, he and his skeleton army had been picking off lone bandits, but the main group in the cabin would be tougher, as they had combat skills. Even so, Vandeleur was ready for the fight. A few bandits were talking amongst themselves, when suddenly one of them was shot in the neck with an arrow and fell from the watchtower. Vandeleur stood with Bone Man, the one who had fired the arrow. This made the bandits realize they were under attack, and they saw Vandalieu and his skeleton army charging into their camp. The bandit leader tried to calm his men, ordering them to switch to axes and maces to destroy the monsters, and prepared to counterattack Vandalieu's army. One of the bandits confronted the bone bear, trying to attack, but was caught by the monster and crushed in a deadly hug. Meanwhile, the skeleton monkey jumped down from the tree into the middle of the bandits, easily taking down its enemies. The skeleton wolf continued its attack on another bandit, mauling him to death. The humanoid skeleton ant drew its sword, cutting down those who stood in its way. The bandits panicked, having never faced such terrifying creatures before. However, the bandit leader kept shouting, trying to encourage his men to fight even though he was already planning to sacrifice his comrades so he could escape. While his men were fighting the bone monsters, he sneakily ran towards the merchant's cargo wagon, but was stopped in his tracks when Vandalieu raised a wall of earth in front of him. Now he was cornered by Vandalieu, and the vengeful spirits, including the spirit of the innocent man's daughter whom he had tortured when they were still alive. Vandalieu ordered the skeleton bear to approach, causing the terrified bandit to kneel and beg for his life, and offer to become Vandalieu's ally. Unfortunately for him, Vandalieu saw no value in him, and ordered his undead allies to kill him quickly. Meanwhile, the rest of the bandits fled, accidentally kicking the skeleton vulture, a creature with no combat skills. And because it was a skeleton, it couldn't fly either. The vulture was saddened to hear that, but Vandalieu comforted it, saying that, perhaps after the battle, if it leveled up enough, it would be able to fly. Vandalieu used his life detection skill to check the house to see if there were any survivors. He then contacted the spirit of the bandit leader and asked about the person inside. He explained that it was a merchant the bandits had captured a few days ago, who turned out to be a member of a wealthy family. So the bandits planned to hold him for ransom. Vandalieu became interested and entered the house, where he found a young boy locked in a cage. Vandalieu used his spirit flame to free the boy, then told him that all the bandits had been eliminated. He warned the boy not to reveal anything about their encounter and turned to leave, thinking it would be wiser not to leave any witnesses. However, Vandalieu didn't want to stoop to the level of the bandits by killing an innocent person. Besides, he knew that one day his former classmates would be reincarnated into this world, and he didn't want to be killed in the name of justice. The merchant boy followed Vandalieu out of the house, happy that Vandalieu, despite looking like a ghost, was actually just a kind child. However, that joy quickly vanished when he saw Vandalieu's army of the undead, surrounding the corpses of the bandits. Vandalieu warned that if the boy revealed their meeting, his undead army would hunt him down. The next day, Vandalieu and his mother were at the bandit camp, collecting all the valuable items. His mother asked if he was going to see the merchant boy off, but Vandalieu figured his army of skeletons could do that instead. Anyway, he'd returned all the boy's belongings and that was enough. After all, the boy was just a stranger to him. Vandalieu thought about using the bandits' leftover food to cook himself a meal, but his mother objected, reminding him that he was only 1 year old and shouldn't be cooking for himself. Vandalieu tried to explain that he was stronger than a normal 1-year-old and could use magic to cook, but his mother wouldn't accept that. She insisted that no matter how strong he was still just a baby and should listen to his mother. In the end, Vandalieu had to give in. After that, Vandalieu suggested loading all the spoils onto the horse-drawn cart. But his mother wondered how they could possibly pull the cart when Vandalieu had given their only horse to the merchant boy. Just then, the spirit of the man who had been killed by the bandits, who had been a carriage driver and horse trainer in his past life, offered to drive the cart for them. Vandalieu agreed, and after taking control of the cart, the man's spirit easily steered it, carrying Vandalieu and his mother away. Meanwhile, the Baron was relaxing, sipping a glass of wine, while his servant congratulated him on his promotion. The Baron paid it little mind, enjoying the good fortune and prosperity his town was experiencing. After the death of the Dark Elf clan, not only had the bandit situation improved, but social order had been restored, and even problems with plague seemed to vanish overnight. Truly, they were enjoying a new era of peace and prosperity, and it seemed luck was on their side. Meanwhile, Vandalieu gave the command to destroy a brick wall, causing it to crumble right in front of a group of patrolling soldiers. The bricks began to gather on their own, and formed a giant creature with glowing eyes letting out a terrifying roar. On the ground, the guards ran around in a panic, wondering why the ground beneath their feet was shaking. The captain of the guard demanded to know what was happening, and one of the soldiers reported that the outer wall had suddenly turned into a giant golem. The captain ordered them to stop panicking and attack, but a guard pointed out that the creature wasn't interested in them. It was simply turning its back and walking away. The captain didn't want to hear any excuses, because without a wall, they wouldn't be able to protect the town from bandits and monsters. A guard wanted to obey but wondered, even if they wanted to, how they were supposed to stop a creature like that. The captain was about to yell, but then he realized he had no idea how to stop the creature either. Finally, he ordered his men to take action immediately. At that moment, a servant came running in haste to report the disaster to the Baron, but before he could speak, the entire mansion began to shake, making the Baron think it was an earthquake or something similar. The servant urgently pleaded with the Baron to leave the estate. Just as the Baron turned around, he saw his entire mansion collapse and transform into another giant golem. The giant creature took a step, nearly crushing the Baron underfoot. The servant quickly ran to help the Baron. While the creature continued to walk away, the Baron demanded to know where the guild's knights and adventurers were. The servant sadly replied that even the guild's buildings had turned into golems and walked away. What's worse is that the Baron's wine cellar and his precious bottles of wine have also walked away. This news devastated the Baron, as he dearly loved his fine wines. Now, all he had left were ruins with no wine and no guild. Meanwhile, on the roof of a nearby house, Vandaleur was observing the chaos he had caused, watching the villagers run around in fear as their buildings and possessions suddenly vanished. Vandaleur was pleased with his plan, because every night he had snuck into town and placed golems in various locations, waiting for the right moment to strike. He was proud that the plan was unfolding just as he wanted. Vandaleur turned to his mother and said that the people who once mocked her were now running in fear. His mother thanked him for everything he had done, even praising him for carrying out his revenge so completely. This made Vandaleur pause and think. He remembered that if it weren't for Heinz and Priest Gordon, he probably would have killed everyone in town. Instead, he destroyed the town, but still wondered why he had spared their lives. He told his mother that he wasn't sure how long it would take to resurrect her, but it would also take the villagers years to rebuild what they had lost. His mother said that it was all right, because in the end, he had spared them and given them a new chance. She was about to stroke his head, but hesitated for a moment, before showing her affection and smiling at him. The feeling reminded Vandaleur of the way she'd used to comfort him when he was a child. He thought about what she said about proper revenge and vowed that the ones who killed his mother deserved no forgiveness. One day, he would kill them with his own hands. Afterward, Vandaleur flew down to the carriage with the help of the Bone Bird, which had now ranked up to a rank 3 phantom bird. In another scene, Darcia and another vampire were trudging through the scorching desert. Darcia, exhausted by the harsh desert environment, nearly collapsed, but was fortunately caught by Valen, a vampire. She apologized for slowing them both down, but he reassured her, telling her not to worry. Valen suggested they rest under a large rock to escape the heat. He apologized for bringing her through the desert, knowing she was pregnant. Valen swore to protect both mother and child, even if it cost him his own life. Darcia lay down, thanking Valen but telling him he must not die. She said that the three of them should escape together, and Valen agreed. Afterward, he asked her about naming the baby. Back in the present, merchant caravans were moving across an open field. Darcia began to explain the 4 different types of vampires in the world. First are the vampires born from the goddess Vita and immortal heroes, known as the true ancestors. However, they disappeared long ago and their names have been forgotten over time. The second type are the pureblood vampires, who are either direct descendants of the true ancestors or have received their blessing. Below them are the noble vampires, whose bloodline has been diluted over time. And finally, the subordinates, created through blood transfusion. Darcia concluded that the closer a vampire is to the true ancestors, the more power they will have. However, the common weaknesses of vampires are sunlight, life attribute magic, and the need to subsist on blood. Vandaleur asked if his father was a subordinate serving a pure-blood vampire. His mother replied that at first he was exactly like that. He was a man who lived in the slums, a thug, just as he had said. This information contradicted what Vandaleur had thought about his father, as his mother had spoken of him with such pride before. Darcia went on to explain that Vandaleur's father was still a wonderful man. He had the ability to resist sunlight, something most other vampires didn't have. Vandaleur figured that his own resistance to sunlight wasn't because he hadn't inherited the vampire's weakness, but because his father possessed this natural ability. Darcia continued, saying that Vandaleur's father was highly valued by his pure-blood vampire master for this ability, and was assigned various tasks in society, from dealing in back alleys to gathering information. That was also when the two of them first met. Darcia got flustered as she recalled how she and Vandaleur's father first met, leading Vandaleur to assert that his mother had fallen for a smooth talker. She continued her story, talking about the time she was pregnant with Vandalieu, but mixing vampire blood with another race angered his father's master, and he ordered them both to be executed. In desperation, Vandalieu's father took her and fled. Fortunately, his father could move during the day, something other vampires couldn't do, which helped them escape their pursuers. However, as the months went by, their escape became increasingly difficult, especially as Darcia's belly grew larger and his father had to protect them both. Even so, Darcia never felt worried while she was with Vandalieu's father. She even felt happy during that whole time. We see Darcia and Valen in the middle of a desert, discussing what to name their child. Darcia wondered why Valen wanted to name the baby when they didn't even know if it would be a boy or a girl. But Valen insisted they should come up with a name before the baby was born. Valen kept thinking of names and suddenly had the idea to use part of his own name for the child. Darcia agreed and suggested combining both of their names, and Valen happily approved. Darcia suggested the name Garcia if the baby was a girl, and Valen agreed immediately. He then started thinking about a name for a boy. Suddenly, they came across some difficult terrain and entered a town that seemed to be abandoned, where they were approached by suspicious-looking men in cloaks. The men immediately drew their weapons, and Valen yelled for Darcia to run, while he stayed behind to hold them off. Darcia begged him to come with her, knowing he didn't stand a chance against 3 vampires. But Valen just screamed at her to go. Tears welled up in Darcia's eyes as she turned away, leaving Valen behind. Valen smiled, knowing that his love and his child would be safe. He charged towards the vampires, sacrificing himself to protect his family. This is when Vandalieu is sitting in the carriage with his mother, listening to her tell him about his father's final moments. Darcia explained that it was because of Vandalieu's father's sacrifice that she was able to escape into the forest and give birth to him. As she lay beside her newborn child, she smiled, thinking of Valen, and named her son Vandalieu, the name his father had wished for him. Darcia asked Vandalieu if he liked the meaning behind his name, and he replied that he did. His mother was happy to hear that, and remembered that she had been talking about the vampires. Meanwhile, Vandalieu thought about how many times his mother had told him the story of his father, and realized that her memory was starting to fade. He compared his mother's condition to Sam, the man killed by bandits, and recalled how Sam had died with such strong resentment. But with his mother, he felt as if he had forcibly prevented her from dying peacefully. If he had let nature take its course, she might have just disappeared. He looked at the bone fragment where he had attached his mother's soul and thought that if he pumped more magic into it, her condition might stabilize. However, to keep her soul, he needed to find a new body for her. Just then, the carriage hit something outside, Model, and Vandalieu asked what had happened. Sam reassured him that they had just run into a goblin on the road. Vandalieu remarked that he couldn't level up from killing goblins anymore and wanted to reach level 3 before they got to the mountains. His mother reminded him that even at level 2, he was already plenty strong, since it normally takes an entire party just to defeat one goblin. He agreed but emphasized that the place they were headed was full of people who weren't normal, and he wanted to at least help everyone level up. The story shifts to a few days earlier when the group had stopped in a cave. Darcia explained that they shouldn't go to the Dark Elf village without her, because if she wasn't there, Vandalieu wouldn't be able to prove he was a half-dark elf due to his appearance. Vandalieu agreed and suggested that instead, they should stay in a place that was hostile towards Dhampir hunters. His mother suggested the Orbom Kingdom, where the state religion conflicted with the main religion of Alda, which the hunters practiced. She also guessed that Orbom might treat Dhampirs differently than the Amid Empire, though she had never been there herself. Darcia added that in Orbom there were beast people and giants who served as dukes, so at the very least her son would be safe there. Vandalieu couldn't be completely sure, but he knew he couldn't go on living in caves forever. So he agreed to his mother's plan. They began their journey to the Orbom Kingdom. Suddenly the carriage came to a quick stop, and Vandalieu announced that he was going to take a nap. Suddenly a man approached the carriage, startling Sam. But Vandalieu reassured him that it was just a lost spirit drawn to his power. The man called Vandalieu rude and offered to provide some special information. Vandalieu was curious about the man's identity, and the man replied that he used to be a spy for the Amid Empire but was killed before he could reveal his information. The man then started acting strangely as he tried to entice Vandalieu into listening to the top-secret information he had to offer. Vandalieu reluctantly agreed to listen, and after sharing the information, the man felt relieved and passed on peacefully. Vandalieu's mother asked if he was talking to someone, and he replied that he had just spoken with someone who gave him information about an upcoming war between the Amid Empire and the Orbom Kingdom. This complicated the group's situation because if a war was approaching, instead of just being stopped and questioned for being outsiders, they would most likely be attacked. Vandalyu understood there was no other choice, so he ordered Sam to head southeast from the border and pass through that region to enter Orbom. Sam hesitated because this southeastern region was a high mountain range teeming with monsters. The monsters there were so dangerous that no adventurer or human dared to set foot inside. He also reminded him that it was the very place where Zakart had lost his life. Vandalyu understood the dangers, but he figured that facing monsters was still safer than encountering humans. Sam reluctantly agreed and followed Vandalyu's orders. Their next destination was the Devil's Nest, a place where no human had ever set foot. Before they had gone very far, the carriage stopped, and Sam called for Vandalyu to look outside. Vandalyu saw a large gate, but Sam explained that it was a dungeon, a natural den filled with monsters created because the land above it was tainted by magic. Vandalyu asked if they had already reached the Devil's Nest, but his mother didn't think so, since there were hardly any monsters around. She figured that the monsters in this dungeon were probably weaker than the ones near the Devil's Nest. Vandalyu suggested that the group should make a stop at the dungeon, which confused his mother as he seemed far too casual about entering. Even if the monsters were weaker than those in the Devil's Nest, a dungeon was still a dangerous place. Vandalyu said he understood his mother's concerns, but he also saw the benefits of entering the dungeon. By doing so, the entire group could level up, so that when they faced the stronger enemies in the Devil's Nest, they'd be able to travel more safely. Darcia was still hesitant. But Sam agreed with Vandalyu. Lanyan vowed to protect him at all costs. This made Darcia more accepting of the plan, but she asked Vandalyu to promise to stay safe since she couldn't protect him. Vandalyu agreed and reassured his mother that he would have Bone Monkey and the rest of the group with him. With that, Vandalyu and his group headed into how to conquer the dungeon. Once inside, Sam started wiping out all the goblins in their path, leading him to remark that the dungeon was less dangerous than he'd thought. Vandalyu asked Sam why he found the dungeon to be less dangerous, and his mother explained that it was likely a newly formed dungeon, and no one had tried to explore it yet. Sam wondered if someone had seen the dungeon, why they would leave it unconquered. Darcia explained that perhaps the dungeon wasn't worth exploring, and Vandalyu agreed, noting that humans don't usually act unless there's a clear benefit. Sam praised Vandalyu for being wise, and wondered if it had to do with his reincarnation, which he had explained to Sam before. However, Sam also warned Vandalyu not to act too much like an adult in front of others. Vandalyu admitted that he was a bit mature for his age, but that he wouldn't try to pretend to use childish words to hide his mental maturity. Then, Vandalyu brought up how Sam often called him Master and asked him not to. Sam suggested calling him Young Master since he was only 1 year old. But that wasn't what Vandalyu meant. His mother added that Sam didn't have many other spirits to talk to, since the bone creatures in the group were animal spirits, so they couldn't speak. As for the spirits of Sam's 2 daughters, Saria and Rhea, they were dominated by the fear from when they died, so they couldn't speak either. Sam began to wonder what could be done to help spirits like Rhea and Saria, but his thoughts were interrupted when Vandalyu asked if something was bothering him. Sam simply replied that his duty was to serve Vandalyu, so it was only natural for him to admire him. The group continued on their journey, until Darcia said she needed to rest and entrusted her son's safety to Sam. Before disappearing into the bone fragment, Darcia wished Vandalyu a good night. They continued upward until they came across another staircase, and Vandalyu believed that his group could easily clear this dungeon without any major obstacles. However, he was completely unaware that the dungeon's final boss was sitting on a throne, waiting for them. Meanwhile, Vandalyu's skeleton army was pushing Sam's carriage up the long flight of stairs. Suddenly, they were ambushed by a swarm of poison frogs, forcing Vandalyu and his army to fight back. They didn't have to do much, though, as Sam easily ran over the frogs with his carriage. He even expressed his enjoyment in crushing the monsters, which Vandalyu didn't mind, as long as he didn't damage the carriage in the process. Finally, the group reached the 4th floor of the dungeon. As they explored the dark cave, an army of undead knights rose from the ground, weapons in hand. Sam suggested they retreat, and Vandalyu agreed until the undead army lined up and bowed to the boy. Vandalyu was stunned, not expecting this to happen at all. Model. The undead army even threw down their weapons to show their loyalty to Vandalyu. Even though we were given free passage, Vandalyu and his group still proceeded with caution. Vandalyu didn't think it was a trap, but he still used his danger sense skill just to make sure nothing unexpected happened. Sam praised Vandalieu for being able to tame an entire undead army, but Vandalieu explained that it was because of his death attribute charm. Although he hadn't expected the skill to affect undead he didn't create. Even so, he ordered Sam to stop for a bit to have lunch. Vandalieu started preparing to cook the frog legs he'd collected from the poison frogs, but his mother quickly stopped him and made him hand over the cooking duties to Bone Monkey. After several failed attempts to start a fire, Bone Monkey was finally able to prepare the frog legs for Vandalieu. As the group ate, Sam began to talk about his past life with his two daughters, even though they had to serve a nobleman. Sam continued to talk about their simple life, which his family never complained about. He then spoke about his wife, who had passed away not long before the tragedy. The death of the lord they served put his family in a difficult position, forcing them to hope for a new start in the big city. However, all hope was shattered when they were attacked by bandits, leading to the tragic death of the entire family. Sam looked at the spirits of his two daughters and begged Vandalieu to save them just as he had saved him. Vandalieu noticed Sam's somber expression and understood what the man was thinking as he looked at his daughter's spirits. This caused Sam to express an overwhelming amount of gratitude towards Vandalieu, but the boy could feel the pain Sam was enduring. Afterward, the group continued deeper into the dungeon, allowed to pass unhindered by the undead monsters. Eventually, Vandalieu discovered a secret chest. He opened it with magic, and inside was a legendary recovery potion capable of healing most wounds. Vandalieu decided to keep the recovery potion and continued deeper into the dungeon, still carefully escorted by the undead army. Finally, they entered a dark and quiet room. And suddenly, the door behind them slammed shut. From the ground, an army of living armor rose up, seemingly having been waiting for Vandalieu and his group. Leading the army was a giant rank 5 skeleton general. The whole group panicked at the sight of this colossal monster. However, Vandalieu noticed something strange about the general, and unexpectedly approached him. The skeleton general readied its weapon and advanced toward the boy, while Vandalieu continued to walk forward with his own skeleton army following behind him. The giant general raised its weapon, but instead of attacking, it respectfully offered the weapon to Vandalieu, which surprised even his own skeleton army. As usual, Vandalieu's mother praised her son for taking down a rank 5 boss without even a fight. Vandalieu took the weapon from the general and gave it to Bone Man. In return, Vandalieu used his magic to upgrade the general into a level 6 Black Skull general. Everyone was overwhelmed by the boy's talent. The boy, Vandalieu, simply explained that he had only increased the general's strength by 10,000 points. After that, Vandalieu thought about using his magic to create living armor and add it to his army. Sam enthusiastically offered the souls of his two daughters, explaining that if they had bodies, he would be able to talk to them. Vandalieu agreed and looked for a suitable set of armor. Luckily, he found a treasure room, where a set of armor that looked more like a bikini than actual armor was kept. Sam explained that this armor was a special type of magic armor, designed specifically for women, and he earnestly requested that Vandalieu bind his daughter's souls to that set of armor. Although Vandalieu hesitated at the thought of putting the souls of two little girls into such armor, and he eventually agreed. The spell was performed successfully, but the two girls still couldn't speak. Vandalieu explained that they needed to level up before they could talk. Although Vandalieu still wondered about the existence of such armor in this world, he realized that Sam was simply happy to be able to reconnect with his daughters. In the end, Vandalieu figured it didn't matter. Sometime later, a group of adventurers were fighting the Black Skull General in the dungeon. With a single swing of his weapon, he sent most of the adventurers flying, nearly defeating them in a single blow. The group's leader tried to remain calm, precisely commanding his team's attacks. Finally, the whole group attacked in unison, and the leader delivered the finishing blow, killing the boss. Tired and nearly exhausted, the adventurers celebrated their victory and began to search for treasure. However, a member of the group informed the leader that there wasn't a single piece of treasure left. This made the leader furious, and he cursed whoever had beaten them to conquering the dungeon, and looted everything at the same time. Vandalieu sneezed. While observing the progress of Rita and Saria, the two girls who were training with their new weapons alongside Bone Man, Vandalieu wondered if letting Rita use a spear and Saria a halberd was too much for them since they were both beginners. However, Sam didn't think this would hold them back, as he saw the girls trying their best to become stronger in order to serve Vandalieu. Vandalieu reluctantly agreed, but he didn't want to force the two girls to do something they didn't like. Sam reminded him that since they didn't have physical bodies, they wouldn't get hurt. Vandalieu agreed and called Rita and Saria over, trying to use magic to help them become stronger. However, he didn't think his magic was working. Sam wondered about this. And Vandalieu suggested that there might be specific conditions for upgrading someone, like he had done with the skeleton general. As Vandalieu turned away, Ria and Saria suggested he try again, since they thought there might have been some kind of effect. But Vandalieu refused, as he wanted them to level up on their own through training before trying again. After training, Vandalieu started to make a walnut sauce, under his mother's guidance and with the help of an earth golem he had created to start the fire. Vandalieu's mother remarked that he had inherited his claws from his father, and Vandalieu agreed, thinking they might be useful in the future. Then, his mother asked him what he planned to be in the future. Vandalieu answered bluntly that he wanted to become a high-ranking adventurer, accomplish great things, and become a noble. His mother thought he was very ambitious, but asked if that was all he wanted. Vandalieu was confused, as he thought there was nothing more to desire than the highest status. He believed that with great status, no one could harm him anymore. His mother was worried but agreed with this line of thinking. However, she then asked him what he would do once all his enemies were defeated. This question confused Vandalieu, as he had never thought that for Ed. After thinking for a while, he replied that he wanted to live a happy life. His mother, Darcia, asked him how he defined happiness. Vandalieu replied that it was a warm family, high social status, and a luxurious lifestyle. Vandalieu's mother commented on how he really longed to be rich, but Vandalieu explained that wasn't it. He just wanted to be able to buy anything he needed and have the freedom to exist in this world without being tied down. He thought back to his first life when he was Hiroto. In that memory, he was sitting in a classroom taking a test when he accidentally dropped his pencil. A classmate sitting behind him picked it up and teased him because Hiroto's pencil was small and dull. Hiroto begged him to give it back because it was the only pencil he had left. And all his other pencils were worn down, but he still kept them until they were completely useless. Instead of giving it back, the classmate gave Hiroto his own pencil, which had a cute character sticker on it, and apologized for making fun of him earlier. He let Hiroto take the pencil home. Hiroto felt grateful and went home to do his homework with a warm smile. However, a family member saw the pencil, Owen, thinking it was a toy, snapped it in half and threw it in the trash, along with a hard slap across the boy's face. Hiroto's relative continued to berate him, reminding him that he was forbidden from having any toys because they would make him weaker in the future. Back in the present, Vandalieu was looking sullenly at the finished walnut sauce. His mother praised him for his hard work, and Vandalieu replied that he didn't know what a luxurious life was yet, but he would think more about it when they reached the Orbaum kingdom. The group continued their journey, and Sam noticed that winter was coming earlier than expected. Vandalieu suggested they pause their journey and live by hunting bandits and wild animals until spring arrived. Sam happily agreed, mentioning that since the group entered the dungeon, he had been able to level up and even get ghost horses to pull the carriage. As they continued on their way, a girl's scream rang out, and Vandalieu smelled blood in the air. Sam asked the boy what he was going to do, and Vandalieu weighed his options before sending a bone vulture to scout the scene. He looked through the bone vulture's eyes to observe the situation. Vandalieu could see a group of men surrounding a young, unconscious girl, preparing to violate her. This made Vandalieu come to an immediate decision: kill them all. Although his priority was to save the girl, if she became a danger and revealed anything about his group, Vandalieu was prepared to silence her forever with his own hands. He and his group rushed toward the scene at full speed, ready to fight for justice. The story shifts to a small village where Chief Zadiris was teaching her tribe members how to distinguish different types of wild herbs. One of the tribe members, Vilda, didn't understand the importance of learning these things, since there were plenty of edible plants near their village. He didn't see why they had to learn to identify plants near demon territory. Zadiris explained that, although their village had an abundant supply of herbs, she believed it was crucial to know about unfamiliar herbs outside their territory, in case of an emergency where they had to flee. She also said that with this knowledge, they wouldn't have to waste time exploring the wilderness in a crisis. The tribe members agreed with Zadiris, while also being unable to help but admire how cute she was. Even though she was the oldest in the village, Zadiris tried to keep them focused on the lesson, while telling herself that she didn't have much time left to live. She wanted the tribe members to learn as much as possible so she wouldn't have to worry about them after she was gone. Zadiris continued teaching the tribe members about herbs, especially those used to heal wounds. Suddenly she heard the footsteps of intruders. An arrow was shot towards her, but it narrowly missed. Just then, a group of adventurers who had been tracking them for some time finally found them. The adventurers charged towards the girls, But Zadyrus used her magic to protect her tribe members. She created powerful roars, and one of the adventurers tried to use the spell Zine to subdue them, but the tribe members reacted quickly and defended in time. Zadyrus immediately cast a spell to blind the enemies, then turned to her tribe members and urged them to flee. The girls obeyed and ran past the stunned men. But Vilda realized that Zadyrus intended to stay behind. Zadyrus reassured them that she would be fine and told them to leave without worrying about her. With tears streaming down their faces, the girls fled, leaving Zadyrus to face the group of men. The adventurers tried to chase after the girls, but their leader ordered them to stop, because the real target was Zadyrus, whose magic level was much higher than the other girls, and would be more valuable on the slave market. Zadyrus tried to lure the group of men away from her tribe members, but her age was weighing down on her, making her not as strong as she used to be. The adventurers continued their pursuit and shot arrows at her, but they all missed. Zadyrus kept running, thinking of a way to escape them, but she suddenly slipped and fell off a cliff. She fell, landing heavily injured and exhausted on the ground. Zadyrus thought that she would die an honorable death, having sacrificed herself to save the others, and at least someone would be able to take over her role as chief. The 5 men finally caught up to her, kicking her, so she fell backward onto the ground. Aeon began to admire her enchanting beauty. They started discussing how much money they could make if they sold her into slavery. This enraged Zadyrus, who screamed, revealing that she understood their language, and lunged for the throat of one of her attackers. Surprised, the man quickly drew his sword and plunged it into her body. The overwhelming pain sent Zadyrus into shock. She collapsed to the ground, screaming in agony. The other adventurers held her down. The one who had stabbed her told Zadyrus that the sword was a magic weapon, enchanted with pain up, which made the pain she was suffering 3 times more intense. Another one of the adventurers suggested that they should indulge in some depraved pleasure as a reward for their efforts in capturing her. Kai, the man, twisted the blade deeper into Zadyrus' body, and began to rip her clothes. However, just as he did, an arrow struck one of his comrades in the shoulder. This drew their attention away from Zadyrus, as they thought the rest of her tribe had returned. Instead of the tribe, they saw a merchant's carriage charging straight for them. From the carriage, Bone Man fired another arrow at the men, but this time it missed. Vandalyu then created a magic absorption field around the adventurer's mage, preventing him from completing his spell. Sam warned the men to surrender, or he would run them all over with his carriage. Seeing the carriage hurtling toward them, the men panicked and scattered. Sam confronted the fake adventurers, accidentally throwing Vandalyu from the carriage in the process. The battle began, with Vandalyu's undead army fighting against the human adventurers. The skeleton army proved stronger than the fake adventurers had anticipated, but soon they began to fight back. They shoved Bone Man against a tree, so when another one chopped off Bone Monkey's arm. The leader of the group ordered the mage to cast support spells, but he replied that he couldn't because he was trapped in Vandalyu's magic absorption field. Vandalyu noticed the mage had figured out how the spell worked, but he wasn't particularly concerned, because no matter how hard they fought back, his undead army still had the advantage. He remarked that the battle was hopeless for them the moment they lost their mage. One of Sam's daughters, either Raya or Saria, charged at the leader and nearly struck his neck with her spear, but he managed to dodge. However, he quickly realized that the girl had no fighting skills and was just swinging her weapon around randomly. Even so, he didn't know how to defeat her, since she didn't have a physical body and had no obvious weak points. In desperation, the adventurer leader reached for his blade and aimed for the center of the girl's chest, managing to shatter her breastplate. Flustered, the girl tried to cover her chest, even though no one could actually see anything since she didn't have a real body. This enraged Sam, who charged forward at full speed, ramming the carriage straight into the man, sending him flying far across the field. The battle ended with the adventurer's defeat. Sam apologized for losing his cool during the battle and for accidentally knocking Vandalyu off the carriage earlier. But Vandalyu replied that it was fine, since he had high-level regeneration. Vandalyu looked at his army of skeletons and realized they had suffered heavy losses. He also admitted that the adventurers were stronger than he had initially anticipated. Even so, he considered this a learning experience for future confrontations with stronger warriors like Heinz. Sam then asked Vandalyu why, even though he knew the adventurers might be stronger, he still risked everything to save the young woman. Vandalyu thought back to what had happened to his mother and Sam's 2 daughters, and replied that of course he would always step in to help. However, next time he would prepare an ambush beforehand. He turned to Zadyrus and noticed the magic sword was still embedded deep in her body. Vandalyu quickly neutralized the sword's magic, and reassured Zadiris that he would be able to heal her wound. Sam wondered how Vandelieu could do that when he only used death magic. Vandelieu reminded him of the recovery potion they had collected from the dungeon. Vandelieu turned back to Zadiris, quickly pulling out the sword, and cleaned the wound with the potion, healing her instantly. Zadiris sat up and Vandelieu introduced himself, offering her a cloth. However, Zadiris didn't respond, seeming lost in a daze, completely oblivious to him. Vandelieu guessed that after everything that had happened to her, it was understandable that she didn't want to talk. He thought that if it were his mother or Sam's two daughters, they might have had an easier time connecting with Zadiris, since they were all women. Meanwhile, Sam and his daughters cheered for Vandelieu from the sidelines, encouraging him to break the tense atmosphere with Zadiris. Vandelieu admitted that, despite having lived through 3 lifetimes, he still lacked experience in communicating with women, and didn't know how to talk to someone who had just been assaulted. Even so, he tried to gently start a conversation with Zadiris. Suddenly, she threw herself at him and began to cry. Vandelieu wanted to comfort her, but Zadiris' unusual strength, combined with her claws digging deep into his back, made things more difficult. He tried to endure it, but inwardly he was silently crying out to his mother for help, completely unprepared to be hugged by a woman for the first time in his 3 lives. After she regained her composure, Zadiris thanked Vandelieu for saving her from those men and for leading them back to the village. On the way, Zadiris shared with Vandelieu that, despite being a ghoul with high endurance, she had never experienced such excruciating pain as when she was stabbed with that magic weapon. Vandelieu asked if ghouls were considered undead, but Sam explained that ghouls were more similar to vampires. Zadiris agreed, and explained that they share the same bloodline as vampires, their ancestor being the twin sister of the direct descendants of the goddess Vida and Zakart. Vandelieu added that his mother once told him ghouls rarely appeared outside of their villages. Zadiris agreed, but recounted that she had fallen into an unfortunate situation with the adventurers, and wondered if ghouls were meant to mate with creatures like orcs. Vandelieu objected, saying he found her very attractive. This made Zadiris blush, wondering if what she was experiencing was the allure of a vampire. She told Vandelieu that she was actually an old woman. Vandelieu asked her age, and she replied that she was 290 years old. She went on to explain that a ghoul's lifespan is about 300 years, so she didn't have much time left. This news saddened Vandelieu, but they continued on their journey. Along the way, the group encountered a small army of beastmen heading toward them. Zadiris realized the beastmen were the young men from her village, but both the party members and Vandelieu's army of skeletons immediately went on the defensive. One of the tribesmen explained that they had come to rescue Zadiris after Vilda's group informed them of what had happened. He immediately questioned why Zadiris was leading outsiders to their village. Vandelieu curiously asked how these large, lion-like men could also be ghouls, and Sam explained that male ghouls look completely different from female ghouls. Zadiris ordered the ghouls to lower their weapons, explaining that they were in the presence of the ones who had saved her life, and that Vandelieu was the commander of the undead army. Just then, a tall ghoul stepped out from the crowd, whom Zadiris called Vigoro. Vigoro told Zadiris that she needed to return to the village as their chief. However, Zadiris was willing to give up the position as she believed she would die soon anyway. Vigoro told her not to say such foolish things, and that no matter how strong he was, the tribe members would never allow him to become chief. The two of them argued back and forth for a while, until Vigoro asked what they should do with Vandelieu's group, since allowing outsiders into the village was forbidden. Zadiris expressed her wish to welcome them as honored guests, although Vigoro was still hesitant. After sensing no threat from Vandelieu, he permitted them to enter the village. Vigoro let out a terrifying roar to inform the other members of their plans. Vigoro led the undead army and Vandelieu's group back to the village. At the village, a welcoming festival was underway, honoring Vandelieu and his party for saving their chief from danger. Vigoro offered Vandelieu some roasted meat as a sign of sincerity, but Vandelieu politely declined. He admitted that he was grateful for the hospitality, but he didn't really want to eat, as it was meat from the dead adventurers. Vandelieu thought to himself that, although their village looked like a normal human village, they were still ghouls and casually ate human flesh. After refusing the food, a group of village girls quickly surrounded Vandelieu, showing their affection to thank him for saving the chief. The girls nearly tore Vandelieu apart trying to embrace him, and he thought about the natural charm he had with women. He mused that if he were to die in this life, at least he could go peacefully. Later, inside the carriage, Vandelieu informed his mother that their group would be staying in the village until spring. His mother was uncomfortable with the idea, as the village was full of ghouls, and she worried that Vandelieu had no control over them. If they became hungry, they might eat him. However, Vandelieu didn't think his life was in danger, and he added that he would be learning magic under Zadiris' guidance to pick up a few new spells. Darcia asked why her son didn't just enroll in a magic guild in the Orbaum kingdom, but Vandelieu explained that it would be a bad idea. He would need an ID to register, and that ID would reveal all of his information, including his possession of death magic, which he didn't think existed in the current world. On top of that, thanks to the curse a god had placed on him, Vandelieu feared he might become the subject of experiments once again. His mother began to understand and just asked him to be careful for her sake. That night, the village women continued to swarm Vandelieu, asking if they could dress him up like a girl and cut his hair, which he vehemently opposed. Just then, another woman named Bazdia returned to the village with a sack of meat for everyone. When she saw Vandelieu, she asked what he was and wondered if he was a ghost. One of the other women explained that Vandelieu was very strong and had even saved their chief, which intrigued the tall woman, Bazdia. She approached Vandelieu and he couldn't help but admire her impressive muscles. Bazdia thanked Vandelieu for saving her mother, Zadiris. After that, Bazdia took Vandelieu inside and started preparing a meat dish for him. She asked if he liked the meal. Vandelieu didn't have strong feelings about the food, concluding that it was just average. However, he still forced a smile and complimented her cooking. Bazdia was stunned by his reaction since everyone else hated her cooking. This made Vandelieu regret not being more honest. After chatting for a bit, Bazdia told Vandelieu she had to finish her cleaning, which surprised him as he had heard she was the tribe's best warrior. Bazdia admitted that she had the lowest rank in the entire tribe, which made Vandelieu wonder, since her mother was the chief. Bazdia explained that in their tribe, men held the power and women only learned magic. Although her combat skills were perfect, her magic was very weak. She also mentioned wanting to have children as soon as possible to avoid housework and spend her free time training. Vandelieu asked why Bazdia was in such a hurry to have a child. Bazdia replied that she was 25 years old, and in their tribe, women usually became mothers very early, so she felt like she was getting too old. Vandelieu disagreed, saying she was overthinking it, and even called her beautiful. Bazdia thanked him for the compliment, but said that Vandelieu was too young to have seed, which almost made Vandelieu choke. He was surprised by what she said, but Bazdia didn't seem to notice his discomfort. Then, she remembered that Vandelieu could use a strange type of magic, and asked if he could transfer his seed through magic, or make certain parts of him grow bigger using magic. At this point, Vandelieu refused her offer. After that awkward situation, Zadiris apologized for her daughter's behavior, but she wondered why Vandelieu, despite his young age, could understand Bazdia's meaning. This surprised Vandelieu as well, since he was supposed to have the mentality of a 1-year-old. Regardless, Zadiris regretted trying to push motherhood on her daughter, and explained that, unlike humans who can freely choose their partners, it's much harder for ghouls to get pregnant, which could threaten the entire tribe's existence. Vandelieu then asked if the ghouls knew who the fathers of their children were. Zadiris replied that that wasn't the case, and she revealed that Bazdia's father was none other than Vigoro. She recounted that she and Vigoro once had a relationship, and warned Vandelieu about the dangers of drinking too much. Zadiris quickly changed the subject to magic, and asked Vandelieu to recreate the spell he had used on the adventurers. When Vandelieu performed the magic without chanting an incantation, Zadiris was astonished to see that he didn't need to chant beforehand. Vandelieu explained that it was thanks to his chant cancel skill. Zadiris wondered how a child like him could have such a rare skill, and she thought that perhaps he was a genius or a demon. Vandelieu simply replied that he didn't know why he had this skill. It was just something he knew how to do. After that, he further explained his death attribute magic to her. Zadiris wondered if the kind of death magic Vandelieu mentioned really existed, and wondered if there was anything she could teach him. Since he was already so proficient at manipulating magic, including no attribute magic. This caught Vandelieu's attention, and he asked about no attribute magic. Zadiris explained that it was basic knowledge of magic, but Vandelieu reminded her that despite his great power, he was still just a beginner. Zadiris agreed to teach Vandelieu, and asked how much mana he had. When Vandelieu replied that it was 100 million, in a very casual way, Zadiris was completely stunned by his monstrous capabilities, as she only had about 10,000. Despite this, she still agreed to begin his training. Spring was approaching, and 6 months had passed since Vandelieu and his group began living in the ghoul village. Vigoro noticed that everyone had become much stronger thanks to Vandelieu, especially his use of magic to preserve the meat they ate. He remarked that Vandalieu was an unusual child, as he peeked out from the hair of the ghoul standing on the cliff. Suddenly, Vigoro remembered something and asked the boy what he thought of his daughter, Bazdia. Vandalieu proceeded to praise Bazdia's impressive physique in great detail, while Vigoro thought that if Vandalieu weren't so young, he would gladly offer him as many women as he wanted to make him stay in the village. Afterward, Vigaro excitedly entered Zadiris' tent, asking if Vandalieu was still continuing his training in the village. Zadiris said that Vandalieu was still training, which made Vigaro excited at the thought that the boy might stay for the whole spring, or even until summer. Zadiris noticed Vigaro's strange behavior and teased him about it. Vigaro complained that she wouldn't understand how he felt, but Zadiris explained that she did understand, that she also wanted Vandalieu to stay in the village with them. However, she also understood that if he chose to leave, then there was nothing they could do to stop him. Cutting back to the present, Vigaro watched the ongoing battle from the cliff. The members of his tribe were busy fighting against beastmen, and Vigaro noticed they were having trouble coordinating their attacks. Although Vandalieu offered to help, Vigaro refused, saying that if he interfered, his warriors wouldn't learn anything. Down on the battlefield, we see Ria and Saria proving themselves to be strong and capable warriors. Sam, from the sidelines, watched his two daughters with pride. Even though he was dead, they continued to grow stronger. Just then, the kobold chieftain approached and engaged one of the girls in combat. As the two clashed weapons, she was surrounded by another warrior who charged in to attack at the same time. Fortunately, her sister rushed in and cut down that warrior with her halberd in a single slash. The two sisters joined forces and attacked the kobold chieftain. Just as they were about to finish their attack, a ghoul warrior appeared from behind and suddenly launched a ranged attack. Vigoro judged that the battle was all but over, as the kobold chieftain was gradually losing its will to fight. However, another warrior suddenly burst from the bushes and joined the fray, letting out a mighty roar that echoed across the plains, startling even Vigaro. The one who had appeared on the battlefield was Gyeon, the level 5 kobold king. Vandalieu urged his group to join the fight to help the ghouls, but Vigoro suggested they stay put and provide magical support instead. However, Vandalieu refused, arguing that the ghoul warriors wouldn't be able to fall back without their help. This fired up Vigaro's fighting spirit, and he immediately charged straight onto the battlefield and rushed in to clash with the kobold king. The two fought fiercely, their weapons clashing in a tense showdown. Saria said that she and her sister should go help Vigoro, but Ria disagreed, arguing the enemy was too tough for them to pull out of the fight. The two sisters looked over at the skeleton army, which had now grown stronger, reaching level 4. The skeleton army quickly leaped into the fray, tearing their enemies apart with their newfound strength. Vandalieu used his magic to raise the earth, ruthlessly burying several kobold warriors alive beneath the soil. Even the ghouls found the act to be a bit cruel. Meanwhile, Vigoro and the kobold king continued to trade blows. The kobold king nearly sliced through Vigoro's mane, accidentally revealing Vandalieu, who was dangling inside it. Seizing the opportunity, Vigoro charged his weapon with energy and swung hard, slashing the kobold king's chest. Blood splattered across his face. Vigoro tasted it and vowed to cook and eat his enemy's flesh after the battle. This enraged the kobold king, causing him to activate his limit-breaking power. The two continued to clash, but Vandalieu could tell that Vigoro stood no chance of winning on pure strength alone. In a flashback, Zadiris was teaching Vandalieu the magic orb technique. She explained that he had to solidify his magic into a sphere and fire it at an opponent. Since the technique has no elemental attribute, it can affect anyone. Vandalieu attempted to cast the spell, but struggled, realizing it was more complex than he'd thought. Zadiris explained that Vandalieu had been unconsciously using his death attribute magic before, but casting a spell without any attribute was much harder for him. Still, Zadiris encouraged Vandalieu to keep practicing. But back in the present, Vandalieu admitted he still couldn't control the magic orb and had to think of another solution. Stepping out from Vigoro's mane, he stood before the kobold king and spat into the creature's open wound. At first, the kobold king just stared at Vandalieu, but then enraged, it raised its weapon to strike the boy. However, it quickly lost control of its hand, and the weapon dropped to the ground as its arm went numb. Seizing the chance, Vigoro unleashed a powerful slash and decapitated the kobold king, winning the duel. The ghouls roared in triumph over their victory against the kobolds. The survivors hurriedly fled into the forest, but the ghoul army immediately pursued them, ready to turn them into dinner. Meanwhile, Vigoro asked Vandalieu about the trick he had used earlier. Vandalieu explained that he had turned his saliva into poison and paralyzed the enemy. Vigoro was very impressed with the boy's power. Afterward, the group returned to the village to celebrate their victory. That evening, while everyone was eating and drinking cheerfully, Vandeleur began to think about his life since coming to the village. His life had become easier and more comfortable, but he knew he couldn't relax, as he still had to focus on his goal of finding a new body for his mother's soul. Zatarus noticed Vandeleur's silence and tried to offer him some food, but he just stared at her blankly. Vandeleur could see the shadow of death lingering behind Zatarus, which meant that in the next few days, Zatarus would pass away. Vandeleur called her over for an important conversation. Zatarus seemed to sense what he wanted to say. When it was just the two of them, Zatarus began by mentioning his training and admitted that he had no talent for magic. Vandeleur already knew this, as he still hadn't mastered level 1 of non-attribute magic. Everything he had accomplished so far was just by copying what he had done in his previous life. However, he knew he needed to try harder to achieve his goal. Zatarus believed that Vandeleur could still become a great mage one day, and she wanted to teach him every skill she knew. But first, she hoped he could extend her lifespan a little. Vandeleur was surprised to realize that she already knew about her impending death, and he agreed to her request. When everything was ready, Vandeleur asked Zatarus to take off her clothes, and he placed his hands on her body, hoping to use magic to make her young again. Vandeleur believed that with his magic, he could reverse the aging process in her body. However, he nearly exhausted all his mana after completing the process. Zatarus was once again impressed by the boy's talent. Vandeleur added that he would extend his stay in the village as he hadn't yet become strong enough. But before leaving, he planned to continue using the rejuvenation magic on Zatarus to completely drain his mana and push his body past its limits. Vandeleur then went on to explain to Zatarus that he had a lot of magic points, and that the rejuvenation spell was currently the most draining. Zatarus agreed, as it would help her become younger. The two made a plan and began to carry it out. As the days passed, Vandeleur continued to practice his magic and heal Zatarus. During that time, the tribe members began to notice that the elder was looking much younger and more lovely, and they started to get curious about her secret. One of the ghouls spied on Vandeleur and Zatarus when they were together, and then spread a rumor that the two might be in a relationship. This rumor made Basdia feel devastated, and she was saddened by the thought that she had lost to her mother in matters of love. Summer arrived, and Vandeleur made more and more progress with his magic. Zatarus encouraged the boy and even picked him up. But Vandeleur reminded her that he was 2 years old now, so she didn't have to treat him like a baby, even though he technically still was one. Zatarus commented that she felt younger thanks to Vandeleur, and he replied that his own power had grown a lot as well. He said he would help the women of the tribe with their chores. But Zatarus warned him not to do everything by himself, or else the others would start getting lazy and relying on him. As Vandeleur started cooking for everyone, he ran into Vilde and asked if she still intended to name her son after him. However, Vilde sadly informed him that she had miscarried and would perhaps try again later. This broke Vandeleur's heart, and he tried to comfort her. He quickly realized that miscarriages were common among ghouls, and they spoke of it rather casually. Even so, the women of the tribe weren't too bothered, as they planned to try again and even wanted to do it with Vandeleur, which in turn made Basdia even more uncomfortable. Vandeleur called Bastia outside to talk privately. Meanwhile, the other women in the village started loudly demanding their turn after Bastia, making the situation even more complicated. When Vandeleur and Bastia were alone in the tent, he prepared to discuss something serious with her. But when he turned around, he saw Bastia taking off her shirt. After the misunderstanding was cleared up, Vandeleur asked Bastia about the miscarriages happening in the tribe. Bastia explained that this was very common for their race, although it might seem strange to humans. Vandeleur began to think about how, ever since he'd arrived in the village, he was the only child there. However, he realized that this was also unavoidable, since the ghoul race had lived this way for thousands of years, and no one had asked him for help with this problem. But then, Basdia came to ask for his help to fix their fertility issues. Vandeleur told Zatarus that he wanted to find a solution to the childbirth problem in the village. Zatarus was overjoyed to hear this, because before, their tribe often had to kidnap women and turn them into ghouls to stabilize the population. It was certainly one way to keep their race from going extinct, but it wasn't the best solution. Vandeleur explained that he would do his best to find a solution, but he wanted to keep this a secret from his mother for now. After examining one of the ghoul women, he realized the main problem was with their reproductive cells. Their lifespan was just too short, but Vandeleur believed he could lengthen them with his magic. This got the women in the village very excited, since they would finally be able to have children. Vandeleur got to work, using his magic on the women of the tribe. Fortunately, after he was finished, all of them were able to get pregnant. That winter, Basdia remarked on how all the women in the village had successfully become pregnant, and Vandalieu added that he was creating a magical tool to help them stay fertile, even after he left the tribe. Basdia went on to mention the possibility of carrying Vandalieu's child, which he found absurd. But then Zadiris chimed in with even crazier ideas, like how she also wanted to carry his child, which made Vandalieu instantly realize that the mother and daughter were exactly alike. Elsewhere, a group of adventurers was fighting a horde of goblins and kobolds. One of the adventurers called out Kadia's name, a woman who was being attacked from behind by the creatures. However, she quickly took them down, and remarked that it was strange for goblins and kobolds to be working together. The male adventurer, Rickon, figured that a high-level beast might be leading them. Before they could say anything more, a terrifying roar from a large beast echoed, cutting off their conversation. The adventurers quickly found themselves surrounded by a massive army of monsters. Rickon tried to fight off the monsters while yelling at Kadia to run. The scene then shifts to the orc noble Bugagon, resting on his throne. A subordinate came to report that there weren't enough women left, and he asked for permission to capture the female ghouls. Bugogan agreed, but on the condition that they leave no survivors. To protect their identity and existence, Bugogan thought about the ghoul tribe's army, which he didn't consider a major threat. However, the real problem was the ghoul mage's village. Bugogan summoned a kobold and asked if the ghoul mage was still alive, and the kobold replied that she was. This angered Bugogan, as the kobold had previously said she was on the verge of death. The kobold went on to explain that something strange was happening in the ghoul village, but Bugogan didn't want to hear any more of it, and immediately killed the frail creature. Just then, his soldiers returned with the adventurers they had captured. The creatures were particularly interested in the woman of the group. While they decided to eat the man right away, Vandalieu sensed the approaching danger, and warned Zadiris that he could feel a large orc army preparing to attack the village. He informed the tribe that while the attack wasn't immediate, the orcs already saw their village as an obstacle, and everyone should start preparing. He revealed that everything he knew was thanks to the spirit of a kobold that Bugogan had killed. It was a good thing he had the ability to talk to spirits. The villagers began to worry as the enemy vastly outnumbered them. Another ghoul tried to raise everyone's spirits, but there was still one major problem. All the women in the village were pregnant, so they couldn't join the fight. Bastia suggested that they team up with the other ghoul villages, and Zadiris agreed. Vigoro then added that he wanted Vandalieu to leave the village, which confused Vandalieu. Vandalieu refused to leave, but Vigoro tried to argue his case to convince him to go. Vandalieu asked why Vigoro wanted him to leave so badly after everything they had been through together. In the end, Vigoro was moved by Vandalieu's words and said it was his choice if he wanted to stay. Zadiris explained that the reason for Vigoro's strange attitude was because he cared deeply for the boy. Zadiris then asked what Vandalieu's plan was for dealing with the orcs, and he presented the armor he had collected during his journey. The whole village was grateful to him for this gift, and with all the benefits Vandalieu had brought them, Vigoro proposed making Vandalieu their king. Vandalieu shyly gave an uncertain reply, but everyone took that as a confirmation. Vandalieu explained that he had no intention of becoming king. He was just confused by the offer. Zadiris explained that since the villages would be uniting to fight the orcs, they needed a leader, a ghoul king, and they wanted Vandalieu to be that person. Vandalieu still didn't quite understand why they wanted him as king since he was a Dhampir, but the ghouls didn't care, as long as he wasn't human. They mentioned how Hedge had told Zadiris that he had a special skill that strengthened his army. Vandalieu asked if this skill was the reason they wanted him to be king, but Zadiris replied that the main reason was for all the effort he had put into building the village, and the entire tribe had unanimously chosen him to be their king. After thinking for a moment, Vandalieu accepted the offer, and the whole ghoul tribe rejoiced, celebrating the occasion. Meanwhile, a lone woman with a dazed look in her eyes was wandering through the forest until she was approached by a troop of orcs. She tossed her weapon aside and let the orcs capture her without a fight. The scene shifts to another ghoul village where Talea, the chief, was proudly admiring the handcrafted jewelry she'd made. Some of her tribe members were hesitant to interrupt her moment of joy, but a few others burst in and begged her to make armor for them. As expected, Talea was annoyed by these requests. Another tribe member informed her that a metal slime had just been caught, which got Talea excited as she started imagining all the new items she could craft from it. But just then, she was interrupted once again. This time, with news that an undead carriage was approaching Talea's village, prompting her to gather her soldiers and go out to meet them. Standing before her army, Talia demanded to know why they were approaching her village. Upon being told that a common enemy was marching towards them, Talia asked for more details. Vandelieu, who was only 2 years old, stepped forward and offered to explain. After looking down at the little boy, Talia and her entire army quickly knelt before Vandelieu, sensing his overwhelming power. Imagine, just a toddler, and he had a whole army bowing to him. Vandelieu introduced himself to Talia and expressed his admiration for her impressive crafting skills. He then asked for her help, in exchange for him solving their low birth rate problem and improving their food quality with his magic. Talia accepted the offer, though she had her own ulterior motives, which included using the boy to expand her territory and live a life of luxury. As for the woman with the dazed eyes, she was now a captive in the orc village. She witnessed the terrible conditions most of the human slaves were enduring before she herself was subjected to the same suffering. Just then, a man named Luciliano appeared, looking very confused. His butler entered the office and asked if he was all right. Luciliano assured him that he was fine and asked the butler to inform Viscount Belno Balcas that he had new information to share. After having a cup of tea to calm himself down, Luciliano began to recall his previous meeting with Viscount Ball. He explained that he had successfully infiltrated the orc village using a puppet, a human corpse reanimated with life magic. Luciliano explained that the puppet's creator and the puppet share all 5 senses, so he could feel everything the female puppet experienced, which explained why he had felt nauseous earlier. Viscount Ball wanted to know everything about the orcs and tasked Luciliano with completing this mission using his puppet. Back in the present, Viscount Ball hurriedly entered the room, and Luciliano quickly reported his findings. He stated that the noble orc species did, in fact, exist. Not only that, but Luciliano also confirmed that the orcs had allied with kobolds and goblins, bringing their total forces to around 500 to 600. This overwhelmed Viscount Ball, as he had heard rumors about the immense power of the noble orcs. For a moment, he wasn't sure if humans could even stand against them. Luciliano suggested that they shouldn't give up just yet, as they still had many B-rank adventurers along with plenty of C and D ranks ready to assist. This cheered Viscount Ball up, until he realized that moving such a large force before the orcs attacked would be very difficult. However, Luciliano informed him that the orcs probably wouldn't make a move until summer, so they still had time to prepare. Viscount Ball agreed and compensated Luciliano for the valuable information. Luciliano was delighted, already starting to plan his future vacation in his head, but his joy was quickly extinguished when the Viscount said he still had to continue monitoring the orc village, which meant his vacation would have to be postponed. Cutting back to Vandelieu, he was busy adjusting armor for the ghouls. Talia was impressed by his ability to use magic to resize the armor. Vandelieu explained that the armor was originally made for humans, so without adjustments, the ghouls wouldn't be able to use it. Talia wondered why Vandelieu worked so hard despite his high status. One of the ghoul women told her that Vandelieu always did everything for them back in their old village, so this was nothing new. This confused Talia even more, as she thought a king shouldn't be doing such manual labor. Then the next person to come try on armor was Bazdia. Vandelieu remarked that the armor Bazdia was wearing was originally made for men, which prompted Talia to make a sarcastic comment about Bazdia's muscular physique. Hearing this, Bazdia immediately shot back with a few sharp words of her own. One of the male ghouls wondered why these two women had such a grudge against each other. Another ghoul explained that Bazdia had caught Talia hugging Vandelieu tightly to her chest while she was sleeping, and ever since then, the two of them have been constantly arguing. That's right, you heard correctly. These two women are fighting over a 2-year-old boy. Vandelieu asked Zadiris if there was anything he could do to solve this problem. But the village chief was lost in her own thoughts, feeling sad about the topic of having a full bust. Vandelieu thought it was best to just drop the subject. That evening, Vandelieu gathered the ghouls to discuss their plan to defeat the enemy. After offering a few suggestions, he concluded that the best option was to plan an ambush for the orcs, and presented a map he had drawn of their camp for the ghouls to see. However, Vandelieu had no idea that none of the ghouls could read maps, and all his efforts seemed to have been for nothing. Undeterred, he then built a model of the orc camp using small figurines, and began to explain the attack plan, while also prioritizing the rescue of all the humans captured at the camp. After finalizing the plan, Vandelieu concluded the meeting, but Talia approached him and said she cherished the map he had drawn earlier, revealing that she could understand it. Not only that, but she had also once been human. The scene shifts to a few orc scouts stationed at a watchtower, chatting with each other. Suddenly, one of them heard a rustling sound and went on the defensive. However, they never expected their own wall to awaken into a wood ghoul and attack them. Vandelieu rejoiced at the success of Phase 1 of his plan, paving the way for an all-out assault on the orcs. The orc army began to take a defensive stance, and Vandaleu handed over command to Zadiris, who rallied her troops and ordered them to charge. The battle erupted, with Vigaro leading the first charge and clashing with the orc general. Meanwhile, in the rear, Vandaleu was replenishing the mage's magical energy, which impressed Zadiris as he was able to perform a no-attribute spell. After leaving the rest to Zadiris, Vandaleu set off with Sam and his undead carriage. He ordered Sam to go at full speed, and Sam quickly complied, gleefully crushing enemies under his wheels with a maniacal laugh. However, upon encountering a horde of orcs, Vandaleu thought it would be wiser to take a safer route. But Sam misunderstood the boy's command, instead safely crushing the enemy. Sam somehow sped up even more, surprising even Vandaleu, as he continued to trample the enemy forces. While their father reveled in crushing the enemy, Rita and Saria also joined the fray, along with the bone beasts. Meanwhile, Vandaleu collected the enemy's souls, noting that his army could quickly wipe out the enemy, unless the noble orcs appeared. Back at the other ghoul village, we see Talea praying for Vandaleu and the others to return safely. She was interrupted by one of the pregnant ghoul women who couldn't sleep and had found Talea praying. Talia told her she didn't need to come so close, which led the woman, Chaklin, to remark that Talea truly cares about others and that she had initially thought Talea was a selfish person. Talea found the woman disrespectful, especially given their statuses, but Chaklin just called her weird. From her hairstyle to her voice was different. Talia replied that it was normal for a pure-blooded ghoul to think that way about her. The woman asked her what she meant by that, and Talea explained that she used to be human, but was kidnapped and turned into a ghoul through a ritual. The woman looked at Talea thoughtfully and asked if she hated ghouls, but Talea replied that how could she possibly hate them when she had been living as a ghoul for over 200 years. Talia encouraged the woman to go back and rest for her baby's sake, but she replied that she wasn't sleepy, and the two of them sat outside talking together. Talia decided to tell the woman the story of how she became the matriarch of the ghoul village, beginning with her childhood. Her father was an excellent craftsman, and so Talia developed an interest in the same craft. We learn more about Talea's childhood. As a child, she would often craft impressive weapons, which worried her father as he wanted her to be more feminine and learn to cook instead of making weapons, something Talea had absolutely no interest in. One day, her younger brother Theo burst into the room covered in dirt, and her father scolded him, trying to encourage him to craft amazing weapons like Talea did. However, the boy saw no reason to even try, since Talea was already so much better than him, and in his opinion, the shop should be passed down to his sister when she grew up. This infuriated their father, and he told Talea to go help her mother. Years passed, and Talea's father struggled to keep the shop afloat after a large corporation moved into town. He slowly fell into a depression, but Talea kept trying to lift his spirits. One day, her father suggested they go out, saying it had been a while since they'd spent time together, which made Talea overjoyed. However, Talea's father led her down a dark alley, where they met two men. It was then that the truth was revealed. Talea's father had sold her to them. In exchange for enough money to save his shop, Talia screamed, begging her father to save her. But he told her that despite her exceptional talent, only a son could inherit the shop. And because she was more talented than her brother, it had crushed his motivation to become a craftsman. He finished by saying that her talent was a burden as the two men dragged her away. As time went on, Talia was forced into prostitution. But one day, while putting on her makeup, she resolved to escape that life. After meeting with a client, she led him to her room and stabbed him, then fled the town, heading into the forest, hoping to start her life over, somewhere no one would know who she was. After escaping into the forest, Talia was discovered by a group of male ghouls. They performed a ritual in front of her, which ended with them mixing their blood into a strange liquid and chanting an unfamiliar incantation. Then they pushed Talea into a pool of liquid and held her down until she lost consciousness. When she woke up, Talia discovered her body had been transformed into a ghoul. She asked why they had done this to her. The ghouls explained that their population was declining and they didn't have enough women. From that day on, Talea felt her life was a nightmare because she couldn't escape the village. Even if she did escape, she could never return to human society. One day, a ghoul brought her a dead animal and told her to prepare a meal for them. After taking a closer look, Talia realized that the animal's hide could be used to make armor. This piqued the ghoul's interest, and he asked if she could make armor. Talia replied that she could, and the ghoul asked her to make armor for them. After crafting the armor and giving it to the ghoul, he inspected it and praised her craftsmanship. This reminded Talia of a time when her father used to praise her skills, bringing tears to her eyes. From that moment on, the men of the tribe began asking her to make more weapons and armor, and little by little this brought a smile to Talia's face. Gradually, all the men in the tribe started competing for Talia's attention, hoping she would craft more things for them. This newfound fame led the tribe's chief to summon her to his tent. He praised Talia because, thanks to her, their hunting success rate had increased, and the ghoul tribe could also fight back against the adventurers who were hunting them. Talia thanked him for the praise, and the chief asked her to craft a special set of armor for him in exchange for anything she wanted. In response to this offer, Talia said that what she wanted was to be by the chief's side, and he accepted her wish. After that, the women of the tribe became furious with Talia and reminded her that she used to be a slave and that she should remember her place. Talia agreed with them, realizing they were jealous of the attention she was getting from the men. The women agreed and demanded that, since she used to be a slave, she had to share the men with them. Talia began to understand them better and said that bullying her wasn't the way to win the men's hearts. Instead, they should agree to be her friends, and she would teach them how to attract the men's attention. After that, all the women in the village started lining up to befriend Talia. Thanks to this, Talia slowly raised her status and spread her influence to other ghoul villages by trading the armor she crafted for food. With that, her village's population grew, and from one of the weakest ghouls, Talia rose to the top and became the chieftain. Back in the present, the ghoul woman fell silent after hearing Talia's story. Talia thought her story might have left the woman speechless, but the truth was, the woman simply found Talia's story to be very impressive. Talia used to think the ghouls wouldn't understand her story, but she had gradually grown more used to and comfortable telling it. The woman asked if Talia had told her story to anyone else, and she replied that she had told Vandelieu, but the boy didn't have much of a reaction. However, Talia added that Vandelieu had told her that he couldn't show his emotions, but that he understood her story. From the look in his eyes, Talia felt that somehow Vandelieu had been through something terrible and could sympathize with her. The ghoul woman remarked that the boy must be very strong and expressed a desire to name her child after him, even dreaming of having another one someday. Talia was a little flustered that the conversation had shifted to another topic, but she decided to let it go. As she thought about the growing rivalry between herself and the other women, Talia recalled that a few days ago, she had improved Bastia's weapons, hoping to receive some appreciation. However, Bastia just took the weapons and said she would put them to good use and that Talia should be grateful. Talia decided to go to sleep, wondering what Bastia was doing on the battlefield. Cutting to Bastia, she was panicking after seeing the noble orcs join the battle. Vandelieu observed the 3 noble orcs through the bone vulture's vision. After confirming their identities, he informed his team that the noble orcs had joined the fight, and that one of them was heading toward Bastia's group. This came as a shock to everyone, as they hadn't anticipated this situation. Even Vandelieu was confused, unsure of what to do next. Any decision he made could jeopardize the mission and cost them the victory. The pressure began to weigh on the young boy as he stood at a crossroads. Meanwhile, Luciliano was still enduring the torture of watching the orcs, and wondered if the Viscount was trying to drive him insane. Suddenly, a noble orc was interrupted, and warned that ghouls were attacking their village. However, Bogogin didn't see it as a big deal and declared that he would join the battle later. Through the puppet, Luciliano became aware of the ghouls, and decided to report to the Viscount. Back on the battlefield, Bastia was busy finishing off the last of the guards, and moved in to rescue all the captured women. She found them in a horrific state, and even discovered Luciliano's human puppet, deciding to save it as well, even though they were supposed to be enemies. Just then, Bastia and her comrades heard the call of a noble orc. Right outside the tent, she was utterly shocked to see an orc noble, as the creature ordered its soldiers to capture Bastia. The ghouls quickly moved to attack, as the orcs charged forward. Suddenly, the orcs felt a terrifying sense of doom approaching. At first, they couldn't see anything, but they could definitely feel it. And what they didn't expect was an undead carriage hurtling towards them at high speed. Vandelieu quickly arrived to help Bastia in her fight against the orc noble. Sam asked the boy about the ability he had used on the orcs, and Vandelieu explained that it was a spell to summon a spirit beast, which released a powerful killing intent to disorient the orcs. While the two were talking, the orcs began to get back up, but Sam quickly moved back and attacked them to make sure they stayed down. This made the orc noble furious. Vandelieu ordered Rita and Saria to handle the remaining orcs while he and Bastia confronted the noble. Bastia wasn't sure if she could take on the orc noble, but Vandelieu reassured her that she would be fine, and that he would never let her die. With no other choice, Bastia took her weapon and prepared to face the orc. However, for a split second, she doubted herself, and it felt as if the orc had cut right through her. Fortunately, she quickly snapped out of it and dodged the attack with incredible speed. The orc continued to launch a flurry of attacks, but Bastia easily dodged them as if she were dancing. The orc wondered how Bastia could move so fast, and she herself didn't know why, until she remembered that Vandaloo was by her side. Vandaloo revealed that he had used magic to support her in battle. With this help, Bastia became more confident and was able to predict the orc's attacks to dodge them. It made her much stronger. In the end, Bastia quickly took down the orc noble and was surprised to realize she had defeated her enemy. Vandaloo came to congratulate her. But Bastia asked about Vigaro instead. Cutting to an earlier scene, we see that Vigaro had urged Vandaloo to go help Bastia in her fight against the orc noble, leaving him and Vaderus to face another orc. He acknowledged Vandaloo's strength and said that he sometimes found himself depending on the boy, but now Vigaro was happy and promised to put on a fight that Vandaloo could be proud of. Vandaloo promised to come back and help after helping Bastia, then hurried away, leaving Vigaro to face the orc noble alone. The battle between the ghoul village's strongest warrior, Vigaro, and the mighty orc noble begins. The two sides quickly charged at each other and began to clash their weapons. However, Vigaro noticed that the orc noble moved with incredible speed, but he didn't let that stop him. He continued to unleash powerful attacks, trying to find an opening to break through the orc noble's defense. Despite Vigaro's relentless attacks, the orc seemed to ignore the blows and just kept charging forward. Finally, the orc noble landed a heavy blow on Vigaro, knocking him unconscious. The noble prepared to declare his victory. Elsewhere on the battlefield, we see Zadiris also struggling to deal with the orcs. Some of the other ghouls suggested retreating, but Zadiris knew there was no way for them to retreat without suffering heavy losses. Just then, one of Vandaloo's undead flies latched onto Zadiris, summoned the Poison Bone army as reinforcements. Zadiris then told everyone that they had no choice but to fight to the end, since neither Vigaro nor Vandaloo could come to their aid immediately. So now, their only option was to crush the enemy. Her troops argued that it was impossible, but Zadiris insisted that the enemy was underestimating them, and that they could use that to their advantage. With their spirits lifted, Zadiris led the counterattack against the orcs, but they wouldn't give up so easily. An orc started firing arrows at the ghoul army, but the mages in the squad quickly raised a shield to block the attacks. The orc noble was confused by the amount of mana the ghoul squad had, until he realized that his own army was gradually weakening. While the ghouls were still full of energy, Zadiris declared that as long as they had Vandaloo on their side, they would be victorious. The orc noble tried to target the ghoul's barrier, but a bone monster appeared clawing at his face. Immediately, he was surrounded by the bone army and suffered multiple attacks. However, the orc noble still managed to slip out of the encirclement, but Zadiris wouldn't let him get far. Back to Vigaro, he woke up just in time, before the orc noble could take his life. Vigaro bit into the orc's neck, but he was thrown off. Vigaro landed near his weapon, and grabbing it, he charged from behind, breaking through the orc's defense and landing a critical hit. Fired up, Vigaro roared in victory as his family defeated the enemy. News of this victory quickly reached Vandaloo, and he informed Bastia, who was overjoyed by their achievements. However, the real final boss was still waiting. This worried Vandaloo, as this was the strongest enemy he had ever faced, far beyond anything he had imagined. He began to think about possible plans to defeat the enemy, even considering facing the final boss alone, but his chances of survival were only 50%. Despite this, Vandaloo decided to take the risk, and left the carriage, confronting the strongest orcs yet. All by himself, Vandaloo faced off against the strongest noble orc. Right from the start, the orc charged forward and launched an attack with sharp pillars of earth, but Vandaloo quickly erected a magical barrier to block it. The orc tried to slash through the shield, but its blade only managed to break the outermost layer. Vandaloo went on the offensive, gathering a massive sphere of magic, and fired it straight at the orc. However, it managed to block the attack. This prompted Vandaloo to fire a continuous barrage of magical beams at it and use his spirit beast to distract his opponent. He even commanded a golem to emerge from the ground and attack the orc. However, none of these attacks had any effect, and the orc shattered the golem with a single kick. The battle was becoming increasingly difficult for Vandaloo. The two continued to clash, with Vandaloo relentlessly attacking and the noble orc defending. Vandaloo even tried to unleash stronger attacks, repeating a series of moves one after another, just like in an action movie. But it was all in vain. Eventually, the two reached a stalemate. Both Vandalieu and the orc recognizing the formidable power of their opponent, and both thought that, at this rate, either one of them could be killed. Meanwhile, Vigoro and Zadiris were arguing about whether Vandalieu could take down the final boss in a single blow, but Sam tried to remind them to stay calm and help Vandalieu. Vandalieu's group tried to rush in to help, but it proved to be useless as the orc was far too strong for them. This made Vandalieu start to worry that the situation was becoming dangerous. And if everyone joined the fight, they could all die. And even though he could resurrect them as undead, he wasn't sure if the enemy had the power to destroy souls. Suddenly, he got an idea. When the noble orc turned back to attack, with just a single blow, he shattered Vandalieu's barrier and delivered the finishing blow. He felt immense satisfaction as he tasted his opponent's blood. Darcy and everyone else were stunned by this horrific sight. Vandalieu fell to the ground along with the orc, and the whole group quickly ran to his side. Vigoro was ready for revenge. But when he got there, he discovered that the orc was already dead. Zadiris rushed in, hoping to save Vandalieu, but the boy showed that he was completely unharmed. Sam immediately understood what had happened, and explained that the moment he was hit, Vandalieu had turned his internal organs intangible and used magic to heal himself. As for how he defeated the orc, Vandalieu had simply turned all the blood in his body into poison, and when the orc licked his blood, it killed itself. Zadiris breathed a sigh of relief, but at the same time, she planned to teach Vandalieu a lesson for scaring her like that. Vandalieu ordered Sam to keep his strategy a secret, but it was already too late. After the battle, Zadiris asked Vandalieu what they should do with the human women they had rescued. Meanwhile, Luciliano was observing the ghouls battle through a puppet, and was surprised at how easily the ghouls defeated their enemies. But most importantly, he was very interested in their king. Luciliano began to imagine what this king was like, not knowing he was about to meet someone truly extraordinary. That's when he heard a woman trying to resist the ghouls' help, and he believed she would be tortured or even killed by the ghouls. Plus, even if she managed to be rescued by humans, her life would be a living hell, and it would be very difficult for her to recover from her time as a slave. Suddenly, Vandalieu approached the puppet, and Luciliano assumed the boy was a Dhampir, but if so, what was he doing with the ghouls? Vandalieu asked Luciliano directly why he was inside the woman's body, which surprised Luciliano as he couldn't believe a child could sense his presence. Luciliano tried to feign ignorance, but Vandalieu could see right through his deception. The boy even said that he could see the woman's soul and that she was begging Luciliano to give her body back. For the first time, Luciliano also saw the soul of the woman he had been controlling all this time and screamed in terror. Vandalieu then began to interrogate Luciliano about spying on them through the woman's body. When Luciliano tried to escape, Vandalieu grabbed him by the neck and demanded an explanation for why he had possessed the woman's body. Luciliano, with no other choice, explained that he was an adventurer, using the woman's body to scout the orc village. Vandalieu asked if the Minister of War, Palpupek, was the one who sent him, but Luciliano said it was the Viscount, and warned him that the Minister of War was planning to send an army to attack the orc village. Vandalieu asked what would happen now that the orcs were dead. Luciliano replied that the humans would shift their target to the ghouls because, by proving strong enough to defeat the orcs, they had now become the enemy in the humans' eyes. Vandalieu felt he'd heard enough and considered what to do with Luciliano, since he couldn't risk his identity being exposed, but at the same time, he couldn't bring himself to kill him. He asked Luciliano if he was the one who killed the woman, but Luciliano denied it, saying she was already dead before he got to her, and he had merely been using her body. The woman's soul pleaded to be set free, and Vandalieu understood. After a stern warning, he let Luciliano go. Vandalieu examined the woman's body and discovered that it was still viable due to Luciliano's presence, and he offered to resurrect her. The woman was overjoyed at the news, but Vandalieu explained that he couldn't bring her back completely, only transfer her soul into the baby she was carrying in her womb. Disgusted, she refused to be reborn in the body of an orc's child. But Vandalieu promised that he could weaken the orc genes, allowing her to be reborn in a more human-like form. The woman accepted his offer, and Vandalieu carried her body back to the carriage. Sam asked why the boy was going to such lengths for her. Vandalieu explained that he was using the woman as an experiment to see if he could implant the soul of another being into a zygote. Sam asked if that was his plan for his own mother. But Vandalieu denied it, since the chances of finding a suitable zygote for his mother were incredibly slim. Back at the ghoul village, Vandalieu was scolded by the women in his life for making them worry with his reckless actions. Even so, they acknowledged that their own lack of strength was the reason Vandelieu had to throw himself into such a battle. Vandelieu was confused by their reaction, because in the past, whenever he was scolded, he was usually screamed at and even beaten. His mother comforted him, but Zadiris and Basdia asked him what kind of parents he'd had. Vandelieu tried to explain that his mother wasn't like that, but Darcia told him it was alright since the other women couldn't see her. Still, it was important to him what everyone thought of his mother. Vandelieu decided it was time to gather everyone for an important announcement. That's when Vigoro entered the tent, looking completely different than before. Basdia guessed it was because he had leveled up after the recent battle. After gathering everyone, Vandelieu explained his reincarnation and why he possessed such extraordinary abilities. Surprisingly, everyone accepted it easily, including the fact that Vandelieu's former classmates might have also been reincarnated into this world with similarly powerful abilities. Vandelieu said that he should still be stronger than his classmates, and everyone just shrugged it off, thinking they would be fine. However, Vandelieu disagreed because they all possessed cheat skills. Vigoro explained that even if all his classmates were overpowered, that didn't make them invincible. This made Vandelieu think that if his classmates hadn't died on Origin, then they couldn't have been reincarnated into his current world. Zadiris added that everyone feels fear when facing someone stronger than them, but Vandelieu shouldn't worry too much, as he possessed a weapon that none of his enemies had. His mother also encouraged him to believe in himself more, and Vandelieu thanked them. However, at the very end, he warned them about the human army that was preparing to come and destroy them all. The scene shifts to Palpapek, the Minister of War, writing in his office. Suddenly, a vampire bat begins to mock him for doing such a meaningless job. The two exchange words for a while, until the vampire reminds him of a past agreement they made, that Palpapek's brother was supposed to be in his current position, not to mention all the benefits the vampires would have with a noble like Palpapek on their side. The minister quickly changes the subject and asks the vampire if he's heard of a dhampir named Vandelieu. The vampire doesn't recognize the name, and Palpapek tells him about the boy being born to a dark elf and being the son of one of the vampire's former subordinates. The vampire remembers his old subordinate Valen, and the war minister continues, saying that his son might be a spirit-controlling mage leading an army of ghouls. The vampire dismisses the possibility that a mere toddler could possess such abilities, and says that he'll be dealt with sooner or later. The war minister agrees and says the extermination has already begun, led by High Priest Golden and a man named Riley, nicknamed the Wind Spear. The vampire shows interest in Riley and asks if he's useful, and the minister assures him that he is strong enough. The war minister also brings up the incident with the golems, and speculates that Vandelieu was the cause. The vampire scoffs at his suspicion, claiming he's overestimating a dhampir's abilities, since a dhampir's power depends on the strength of their vampire parent. The vampire then leaves, leaving the war minister to silently wonder if Vandelieu is truly as strong as he believes. If so, it could be a huge problem for Riley and the priest. The scene shifts back to the ghoul village, where the captured women voluntarily participate in the ritual to become ghouls. Vandelieu wonders where Talia is during all this. Vil suggests that she probably doesn't want to witness the ritual, as it might remind her of when she was turned into a ghoul against her will. Zadiris says she can handle the rest, and Vandelieu and Vilde leave. They stop by Talia's tent, where they find her cheerfully chopping up meat from the orcs, and they both think it's better to just leave her be. That night, Vandelieu gathers everyone to make an official announcement that the human army is approaching and they must all be ready to face them. The next chapter opens with the human army marching straight ahead. Priest Golden meets Riley, a young man. Riley tries to warn the priest that he isn't like Heinz and that he'll be the first one to take down Dampier. However, Priest Golden doesn't care who gets there first as long as they complete the mission. Even so, the priest warns the young man not to get complacent because they still have to face the ghouls who might be getting ready for battle. He finishes by reminding Riley not to underestimate the enemy. Riley isn't pleased about being looked down on by the priest because, for him, the main goal is to surpass Heinz. Finally, their army arrives at the ghoul village, but finds it completely empty. This infuriates Riley as all the ghoul villages they've encountered have been abandoned, and he demands an explanation. One of the knights reports to the priest about the tracks of horse-drawn carriages, and concludes that all the ghouls, along with Vandelieu, left without anyone knowing. Riley grabs one of the knights by the collar and angrily asks why no one from his scouting party reported this. The knight explains that they only investigated the city in the forest, and no one could have predicted that the ghouls would flee into the mountain range. Not to mention that no one had ever heard of ghouls using carriages. Despite this, Priest Golden remains unfazed and quickly comes up with a plan. We go back 2 months, where we see Vigoro insisting on fighting the humans. However, Vandalieu rejects this idea because unlike the orcs, the humans have been planning their attack for months. Even if they could defeat the first wave, the humans would just come back with stronger forces until the entire ghoul race is wiped out. On top of that, they also have to protect the pregnant women in the tribe. Talia agrees with Vandalieu and asks what they should do next. Vandalieu thinks for a moment and comes up with a plan. We continue with the scene of the ghoul group and Vandalieu traveling along the mountain range. Vandalieu opens a path for the group and then seals the entrances behind them. After 3 months of arduous travel, they finally reach the Demon Continent, a place where no human had ever set foot before. Everyone marvels at the vast land, but they're still worried about whether they can fit in, and more importantly, about the high-level monsters lurking within. Vandalieu realizes they're right and plans to investigate tomorrow, but for now they stop to make camp for the night. That night, Vandalieu takes care of the woman who was used as a puppet, which leads Talia to comment that they look like a family. This angers Katia, the adventurer who was captured earlier, and she hurls an insult at Talia, causing the 2 women to start arguing. Talia then asks Katia if she's comfortable with being a ghoul. Katia replies that it's much better than returning to the human world, and even says that the ghouls seem like good people. She waves her hand dismissively and walks away, and Vandalieu starts to think about how these ghouls really are like a family to him. Just then, Vandalieu gets hit in the back of the head with a bone. When he turns around, he sees that one of the children threw it, and the child's mother scolds them. This makes Vandalieu wonder about the new species being born from the ghoul women and the goblin and orc men. Basically, due to the strange combination of genes, they are almost a new species. Zadarish thinks Vandalieu's magic might be related to the children's development, since he used it to keep the mothers healthy throughout their pregnancies model. But in the end, she didn't mind, as these children were more intelligent than the average monster. And now, with a large number of children, their family had grown a lot. The Minister of War informed the vampire that he could no longer help in exterminating the Dhampir. This surprised the vampire, who asked if he could send another adventurer. However, the minister refused because now that the ghouls were in the Devil's Nest, no adventurer wanted to take on the mission. The vampire asked about the priest, but he replied that the priest had other duties to attend to. The vampire expressed his clear disappointment, but didn't explain why and flew away. Meanwhile, he worried that Vandalieu had reached the Devil's Nest and that this could cause trouble for him. Back on the mountain, Vandalieu and his group went out to survey the area. Noticing that everything was much larger than they had expected, suddenly Vandalieu ran off, surprising Katia, but Sam and his girls just teased her for not recognizing when Vandalieu was excited about something. Katia caught up to the boy and tried to scare him with ghost stories, but of course, that failed, as Vandalieu was used to traveling with spirits and controlling the dead on a daily basis. Suddenly, Vandalieu sensed an enemy approaching, and was utterly amazed to see real living dinosaurs in this world. Vandalieu's group immediately got into a ready stance, while the boy looked at the dinosaurs with shining eyes. Not only were there a lot of dinosaurs, but there was also a giant shark jumping around. The dinosaurs surrounded his group, and Vandalieu was filled with joy at the sight of them. Real living dinosaurs right in front of him. If it weren't for his perpetually calm face, Vandalieu would probably have been grinning from ear to ear. He thought about how to kill these creatures without causing too many injuries, so he could resurrect them and add them to his undead army. At least that was the original plan. But his group began to mercilessly slaughter the dinosaurs, killing them one by one. Everyone charged in to defeat the beasts, which made Vandalieu sad because he couldn't preserve them without injuries. No one in the team understood why Vandalieu was sad about the dead animals, until he explained that he had a passion for dinosaurs in his past life, and had always wanted to visit a museum, but his uncle had never allowed it. Vandalieu sank deep into his disappointment, even as Zadarish suggested they should keep moving. Suddenly, he came up with the idea of creating a museum himself, and his spirits gradually began to lift again. The group continued their journey, until they sensed a strange presence. A creature stepped out and introduced itself as the Emperor's messenger. Everyone was stunned to meet an undead creature from the Titan tribe. This undead being seemed overjoyed to meet Vandalieu, even calling him the prophesied Holy Son, and begging him to bring them salvation. He then introduced himself as Nuaza the Lich. Vandalieu introduced himself and asked Nuaza to explain more about what he had just said. Katia wondered if they should even care about what Nuaza was saying, but Vandalieu figured that if things went well, their group could live here. Nuasa announced that he had been waiting for Vandalieu's arrival, just as the Holy Mother's prophecy had foretold. Zadiris felt that description fit Vandalieu quite well, but the boy claimed he knew nothing about this place and asked Nuasa for a brief summary of its history. Nuasa explained that his city was once called the Sun City, and it had prospered thanks to the hero Zakard and the goddess Vita. But 200 years ago, everything changed when the Merg Shield Nation attacked. He recounted that this nation had killed almost everyone, including him, turning him into one of the undead. Sam mentioned that he had heard this story before, as it was quite well known, and Vandalieu asked why the Shield Nation had invaded. Sam explained that it was on orders from the Amid Empire. Nuasa added that since the Amid Empire and the Titans worshipped different gods, it ultimately became a religious conflict. Nuasa was also curious to know the fate of the nation that had destroyed them, and Sam explained that after the war, the Merg Shield Nation paid a heavy price, losing their hero, and ultimately couldn't make use of the resources or treasures from the Titans. Nuasa corrected him, explaining that before the war, their princess had been sent out of the country along with their treasures and resources. Even so, Sam still believed the true loser in the war was the Amid Empire, because the Titans had allied with the Orbam Kingdom, joined the war, and completely defeated both the Shield Nation and Amid. Not only that, but the Orbam Kingdom also reclaimed most of the territory previously occupied by Amid, and the two nations have been at war continuously for 200 years. This was considered the greatest defeat in Amid's history. Hearing this news, Nuasa burst into maniacal laughter, believing that Amid deserved that fate after everything they had done in the past. Vandalieu agreed, saying that both the Shield Nation and the Amid Empire should just disappear. This made Nuasa even more excited, thinking that Vandalieu was the reincarnation of the true vampire ancestor. We learned that when the true vampire ancestor died, he prophesied that he would one day return to bring death to the arrogant gods. Nuasa laughed heartily again. But Vandalieu criticized him for mixing up the oracle's prophecy with the ancestor's prediction. Even so, Nuasa insisted that Vandalieu had declared he would destroy the Shield Nation. But the boy tried to correct him. Changing the subject, Vandalieu asked if the ghouls would be allowed to stay in the city. Nuasa summoned the undead residents of the city to ask their opinion. And luckily, everyone was very friendly and welcoming, despite their frightening appearances. Vandalieu tried to end the conversation with Nuasa, but he said that he wasn't the leader, and that the person he should be talking to is the hero of this land, Borkus. Vandalieu approached the hero Borkus and asked Nuasa about this figure. Nuasa replied that Borkus was the strongest undead among them, and hadn't moved from his spot for 200 years. When Borkus saw Vandalieu, he asked the boy who he was, and Vandalieu introduced himself as the king of the ghouls. At first, Borkus mistook Vandalieu for a little girl, but afterwards showed no interest in him. Vandalieu tried to offer to act as a mediator between the ghouls and the Titans, but Borkus refused, and even resisted the pull of Vandalieu's death magic. Realizing the dangerous situation, Vandalieu decided to play it safe, since even a small mistake could get him killed. Changing tactics, Vandalieu offered to grant Borkus a wish using his death magic. Borkus asked if he could remove a curse from a legendary class item. Vandalieu accepted immediately, shocking Borkus and the other undead, since no one had ever been able to do that before. However, for Vandalieu, this wasn't particularly difficult. This convinced Borkus to beg Vandalieu to save his comrades, and the boy agreed. Afterward, Vandalieu followed Borkus into another room. When the door opened, he felt a blast of freezing cold air, and thought it originated from the mana within. He saw a giant block of ice in the middle of the room, with a severed hand trapped inside. Nuasa explained that the hand in the ice belonged to Zandia. Fortunately for them, Vandalieu said he could melt it with his magic, but first he wanted to know what had happened. Nuasa happily explained, recounting that a long time ago in the land of Talishheim, there were 5 heroes, Borkus, Gina, Ogban, Berrigan, and Zandia. During the war against the Shield Nation, the 5 heroes protected their country, but they eventually had to face that nation's A-class hero, Mikhail. Mikhail was a powerful warrior who wielded a mighty spear, and with that weapon, all the Titan heroes fell. At least that was the story Nuasa had been told. But the truth is, no one really knows what happened between the heroes. Borkus added the detail that it was he, Gina, and Zandia who faced Mikhail. Although they were nearly equal in strength, Borkus was killed in the battle. When he awoke as an undead, the first thing he saw was that block of ice. Borkus then asked Vandalieu to melt the ice, adding that he wasn't sure about his comrade's condition, but at the very least he wanted to apologize to them. Fortunately, Vandalieu had already melted the ice while Borkus was still speaking. After taking the hand, Vandalieu used his power to connect with Zandia's residual thoughts and witness the fierce battle from the past, a brutal battle that lasted until the very end. It's safe to assume that Zandia and Gina were probably dead before Mikhail went underground, though it's still not certain, and the only way to find out was to go deeper into the dungeon. As the two of them went down the stairs, Borkus started to discuss with Vandalieu about the fee for bringing Zandia and Gina back as undead, even suggesting they become his brides. Vandalieu thought Borkus was implying a political marriage, and explained that there was a major problem, since the two of them would just be a pile of Titan bones, not to mention that none of them had the right to marry these two women. However, Nuaza dismissed the warning and said it didn't matter, since Vandalieu was basically the chosen one. When the three of them arrived, they discovered a dragon golem frozen in ice. This complicated things as they couldn't proceed without freeing the dragon. Nuaza explained that the dragon was created by the goddess Vida to protect her legacy, and that Mikhail had confronted it but couldn't defeat it and had to retreat. Nuaza asked Vandalieu about the chances of finding the two girls up Ed, but he replied that even if he could resurrect them as undead, they would just be destroyed by the dragon. Borkus said that didn't matter, because as long as they had the goddess's legacy, they could restore Zandia and Gina's bodies to be as good as new. This caught Vandalieu's attention, and he asked more about the legacy, and Borkus said it was a device that resurrected the dead. That was all Vandalieu needed to hear. This device was located deep within the catacombs. Vandalieu asked Nuaza if anyone knew a safe way to get to the resurrection device, but Nuaza said only the queen knew. That left Vandalieu with no choice but to get stronger to defeat the dragon golem. As he already had someone in mind to resurrect, the three of them sat down and tried to come up with a plan to defeat the golem. Borkus suggested using resources from the Adventurers Guild, but Nuaza said the resources had all been taken, and the only safe place left was in the job change room. This caught Vandalieu's attention, and he asked if he or the ghouls could use it. Nuaza replied that they had never tried it with monsters before, but Vandalieu thought it might be possible. Then he looked at Borkus's missing arm, and casually said he could regenerate it for him, which Borkus didn't expect. After regenerating the arm, Vandalieu decided to return to his group, and rushed in to announce the good news. Unfortunately, he walked in just as Vilda was about to give birth. Vandalieu stood by and watched as Vilda got ready to deliver the baby. Sam rushed in and tried to give Vandalieu some advice to keep his spirits up, while Sam's daughters cheered from a distance, making Vandalieu wonder why everyone was treating him like he was the doctor. Not only that, Zadiris also encouraged him to hold Vilda's hand, which made him wonder if he was her doctor or her husband. Despite his confusion, Vandalieu did as he was told, and encouraged Vilda. Even though he had no idea what he was doing, his efforts still made Vilda smile. Vandalieu suddenly sensed the presence of death, and used his magic to check on the baby's condition. After discovering the problem, he quickly fixed it, and Vilda safely gave birth to her daughter. The birth of the child brought joy to everyone, including Nuaza and Borkus, who suddenly appeared after hearing the good news. After the celebration, Vandalieu mentioned the job change room and the resurrection device, which got Zadiris thinking about it. In the meantime, she forbade Vandalieu from working until his next birthday, because he had been overworking himself and needed a proper rest. Vandalieu tried to argue that all his work was to bring his mother back. But even his mother agreed with Zadiris and warned that if he didn't rest, she would return to the cycle of reincarnation. Vandalieu started to think about what he should do to rest for the next few days. But surprisingly, he found this difficult. While taking a bath, he asked Vigaro what he should do. But even Vigaro couldn't offer any advice. He spent the rest of the day asking everyone around him how to relax, but no one had a helpful answer for him. Finally, he found the Adventurers Guild and decided to read through their collection of books. After waking up from having fallen asleep at the guild, Vandalieu went outside and saw his skeleton monsters training together, but he noticed Skeleton Man sitting alone on the sidelines. He asked why Skeleton Man wasn't joining in, and the skeleton made a strange sound. Somehow Vandalieu was able to understand it. Ria and Saria joined them and asked Vandalieu what he was doing, and he replied that Skeleton Man was sad because he was the only member of his undead army who was still just rank 3. The girls accidentally made Skeleton Man even sadder, but Vandalieu explained that he was possessed by the spirit of a mouse, so it was understandable that he was weaker. However, Skeleton Man still wanted to become stronger, and luckily Vandalieu knew how to solve the problem thanks to all the books he'd read the day before. He just needed to attach a human soul to the skeleton, and the undead were ready to try it out. After performing the spell, at first everyone thought it had failed, until the Skeleton Man began to speak clearly to Vandalieu. Not only that, but he also ranked up to rank 4. Surprised, Vandalieu asked the skeleton man if he remembered his past life, and the skeleton man recounted his former life as a husband and a father. But one day, he was attacked by a vicious beast and was left for dead. Later, everyone realized he was talking about a cat, and the memory he was describing was actually that of a mouse. As the days went by, Vandalieu's group continued with their own tasks. One day, Vandalieu was asked to remove his blindfold, and he was surprised to see his friends and family presenting him with an amazing museum for his birthday. Bastia said that she had hunted the prehistoric animals herself, but she saved a triceratops for him as a pet. His mother congratulated him on his 3rd birthday, and he thanked everyone with tears of joy. Elsewhere, a group of vampires were sitting around a table discussing a problem. We see someone tied up and imprisoned somewhere. One of the vampires began the meeting, with the first topic concerning a damper child. A female vampire, Ternisha, slammed her wine glass on the table, furious that the dampier child had escaped them. She was worried that the dampier child might meet a vampire progenitor, which would become a deadly threat to them. She then ordered another vampire, Berkine, to quickly deal with the subordinate who had failed to eliminate the damper child. But Berkine replied that he had decided to give him another chance. With a snap of his fingers, he summoned Serkrent Osba, the vampire who had previously met the Minister of War. Then, the vampires began to torture Serkrent until he was dead. Ternisha went on to say that Serkrent was Gubemon's responsibility, and she wanted to know why Gubamon had been absent for so long. Birkin understood her frustration and offered one of his lovers, Eleonora, to help with eliminating the damper child. He ordered Eleonora not only to hunt down the damper, but also to deal with Borkus, as this would make Gubamon owe him a favor. However, Ternisha was still not satisfied and warned Eleonora not to fail, or she would suffer the same fate. Shifting to a distant memory, a group of adventurers had left Katya behind because she couldn't keep up with them. Katya wakes up and realizes it was just a dream. Meanwhile, we see Vandalieu in the job change room. He thinks about how in this world, by taking on a suitable job, one can improve the abilities they've already started with. For example, if a ghoul completes a job change and takes the job of a warrior or a mage, they can achieve rapid progress in their abilities. Vandalieu thinks about the curse the god placed on him, but to his surprise, the system still works for him. He realizes that as long as the job he wants doesn't already exist in the current world, he can still obtain it. However, thinking back, the god he met when he was reincarnated has never been mentioned in this world, but he decides not to worry about that for now. For now, his mission is to become strong enough to defeat the dragon golem and claim the resurrection device. He chooses the job Death Attribute Mage and immediately levels up, and along with that, all the skills that were previously hard to improve also develop rapidly, which leaves him quite impressed. 4 months pass, and Vandalieu and his group spend their time exploring dungeons to improve their skills and gather resources. They also work together to rebuild the city, restoring it to its former glory. During a meeting with Katya, he asks her if something is bothering her. She replies that it's nothing, then asks him what he's worried about. Vandalieu talks about how the other children in the tribe have grown, much faster than him, which makes him feel left behind. Katya reassures Vandalieu that he still has plenty of time to grow, which helps him feel a little more cheerful. As Vandalieu steps outside, we see Katya with a thoughtful and melancholic look in her eyes. In a dungeon, Katya is almost attacked by a shark, until one of the tribe's children, now grown up, rushes in and kills the monster before she can react. Another man praises the boy's skills, and Vandalieu agrees, saying the boy has the potential to become a ninja. The monster boy tries to warn Katya about losing focus in battle, but she coldly scolds him. The group finally reaches the boss floor, and are confronted by a hidden boss, the giant island turtle. The turtle begins to attack the group, and Vandalieu immediately goes on the offensive against the giant turtle, while instructing everyone to focus on the smaller minions. However, one of his teammates warns that these creatures are tougher than they thought. Vandalieu adds that even his magic attacks aren't damaging the turtle. Changing tactics, he uses his claws, combined with super strength, to pierce through the turtle's shell. Meanwhile, Katya recklessly charges forward to finish off the turtle, but to her shock, her blade shatters as she tries to stab its hard outer shell. The small minions quickly rush in to attack Katya, but luckily, Vandalieu appears and puts up a barrier to protect them. However, he forgot that the boss was still alive. And to make matters worse, Vandalieu's arm was injured from the last attack, making him unable to fly Katya and himself to safety. The boy collapsed, and Katya started thinking about everything Vandalieu had sacrificed for her. Thinking quickly, she picked up the boy and fled. However, she noticed that the boss wasn't chasing them. That's when she realized that Vandelieu had used magic to trap it. And the way he had knelt earlier was to activate the magic trap. After defeating the boss, Katya burst into tears and apologized to the group. After calming down, she explained that when she was an adventurer, she had a lot of trouble leveling up, and gradually fell behind her teammates. Even so, she persisted in pursuing her dream, until she was captured by the orcs. She began to remember the dreams she had when she was human. But now, as a ghoul, Katya felt stronger than she did as a human, and hoped she could achieve her goal of becoming stronger. Vandelieu tried to empathize with Katya by recalling his own impatience and feelings of inferiority in his past life. He said that even now, he's still impatient and mentioned his classmates who possess cheat skills and are much stronger than him. However, Vigaro and the others thought Vandelieu should stop, as he was giving the wrong advice. Even so, as their king, he said that with careful choices, Katya could defeat those stronger than her. He also said that he was comfortable with being weaker than others because he had a special weapon. Vandelieu also advised Katya to try using magic, since ghoul women have a higher affinity for magic than for weapons. Katya asked what she should do if magic didn't suit her, and Vandelieu joked that she could become a maid along with Sari and Ria. Although Vandelieu apologized for joking, Katya actually started to seriously consider it. The next chapter opens with a group of vampires fighting a dragon. Serkrant urged his fleeing subordinates to stay and complete their mission to destroy the creature. Just then, Eleonora zipped past him and used her skills to unleash a series of slashes on the dragon with ease. Serkrant summoned a bolt of lightning and finished the monster off in a single blow. After the battle, he informed Eleonora of the number of losses his soldiers had suffered. He also mentioned that they still hadn't found Vandelieu and wondered if it was really necessary to search for him in the mountains. However, Eleonora suggested that they search the abandoned city of Talishheim, as it was possible Vandelieu might have established a colony there. But Serkrant dismissed the idea, looking down on the possibility that Vandelieu would do such a thing. Serkrant's smug attitude began to anger Eleonora, as he was too focused on gaining recognition instead of listening to reason. She worried that if she stayed with him too long, she might also get dragged down and punished. Eleonora decided to go find Vandelieu on her own, but Serkrant quickly followed her. Meanwhile, back in the city, Vandelieu was sharing his miso soup with everyone. Just then, a little girl named Povina tried to have some of the soup, but Vandelieu stopped her, thinking she was still too young to eat it. We learned that after Vandelieu and his group returned from a dungeon, the child of the live dead was born, but she had lost her previous memories and had taken on some orc-like features. Fortunately, she still had her old face. Povina was carrying Vandelieu on her shoulders and running around everywhere, until she accidentally bumped into Basdia, who was now pregnant thanks to a fertility aid that Vandelieu had created. Later, Vandelieu met up with his mother, who asked him if he had taken Zandia's hand, but he replied that he hadn't. Darcia then told Vandelieu that the hand was missing, and Vandelieu went to check the last place he left it, only to find that the hand was indeed gone. He began to wonder who could have taken it. As for Povina, she noticed something crawling by, and went to check it out. Povina discovered the severed hand moving around on its own. She ran all over the place trying to catch it, but after a long chase, she accidentally caused a huge mess, which caught Vandelieu's attention. He scolded her for doing something so dangerous, but his mother found the hand, and Vandelieu immediately suspected that she was the one who had taken it. The hand started moving right in front of them, revealing that it had become an undead. Vandelieu called a meeting to discuss the hand, and everyone wondered if Zandia's spirit was possessing it. After asking a few questions, they realized the hand wasn't sure if it was Zandia or not. Borkus suggested that maybe Zandia had forgotten her past life, and asked Vandelieu to check the hand to see if a spirit was possessing it. Vandelieu examined the hand and said he couldn't be sure, because when a spirit starts to lose its memories, its form becomes faint. But he believed it was at least human. With that in mind, he gave the hand a new temporary name until they could determine if the spirit was Zandia's, calling it Leftia. Later that night, we see Eleonora and Serkrant on the outskirts of the city, discovering that it's now very bustling. Not only that, but the Temple of Vita had been rebuilt. And this led Serkrant to believe that the progenitor might actually be here, and that they would stand no chance against him. Eleonora argued that they should stay since the Dhampir might be in the city, and warned of what would happen if they abandoned their mission. Serkrant understood the consequences and decided to capture one of the ghouls to interrogate about Vandelieu. Meanwhile, a ghoul woman was wandering the streets. until she looked into a dark alley, where she was confronted by two vampires. We see Eleonora using her vampire charm to manipulate the ghoul and force her to say everything she wanted to know. The ghoul told the vampires where to find Vandalieu, and Eleonora asked who had received the blessing of the goddess Vida. The answer was Vandalieu, which came as a great shock to Eleonora. Eleonora thanked the ghoul woman and ordered her to sleep. Just then, Serkrant drew a dagger and moved to eliminate the witness, but Eleonora stopped him before he could strike. She explained that the ghoul cared deeply for Vandalieu, and if she died, her spirit would immediately run to him and reveal their plans, even if they tried to purify the body with holy water. After she died, neither of them could see ghosts, so they couldn't confirm if the spirit was gone or not. In short, killing her could actually put everything at risk. Not to mention they didn't have much holy water to spare, so they needed to use it sparingly. Serkrant reluctantly agreed to Eleonora's plan, and the two of them hurried off to find Vandalieu. After sneaking into the castle, they finally found the boy's room. Eleonora opened the door and saw the small Vandalieu, who seemed to be waiting for her. After confirming it was Vandalieu, Eleonora wondered if her magic eyes would work on him, as his behavior was rather strange. To test it, she began to ask him a few questions, and ended by telling him to praise the evil god. When Vandalieu complied, it gave Eleonora the confidence that she had the boy under her control. She continued to ask him about the blessing, and Vandalieu asked back if she meant the prophecy. This confirmed for Eleonora that Vandalieu was still being protected by the goddess, and she wondered if it was safe to attack him. But she knew she had to follow Birkin's orders no matter what. That's when Serkrant burst in, asking her why it was taking so long and telling her to finish this quickly. However, Eleonora told him that Vandalieu was protected by the goddess, and if they attacked him now, it might anger the goddess. But Serkrant didn't care, and reminded her that their mission here was to kill the Domper. He even taunted Eleonora, saying that perhaps she'd grown fond of the boy, but she quickly told him to stop talking nonsense and to kill him. While she was trying to restrain Vandalieu with her power, Serkrant said that she had to be the one to do it, and if she refused, he would report her to Birkin. Eleonora called Vandalieu closer, and as he approached, she began to wonder why now, of all times, she was feeling guilty about what she was about to do. She once thought she had gotten rid of that feeling when she swore her loyalty to Birkin. We begin to learn more about Eleonora. She was once sold as a worker in a mine, until she was chosen to be one of Birkin's subordinates. From then on, she had to undergo rigorous training and witness horrific punishments for those who disobeyed. Despite that, she was still able to make a few friends, until one day she was forced to fight her own friends to the death. Once during a punishment, Birkin told her that there are rulers and there are the weak. If she didn't want to be the one who was preyed upon, she would have to become the predator. From that day on, Eleonora believed that was the only way to protect herself. Eleonora began to wonder why, of all times, she was feeling self-doubt, especially since she had killed many people before. She realized Vandalieu was standing in front of her, and as she grabbed him by the neck, she prepared to stab him, but found that she somehow couldn't go against his will. Just then, Serkrant ordered his subordinate to stab Eleonora, but Vandalieu pulled her towards him just in time. At that moment, Eleonora realized that her ability had never affected him from the very beginning. Even so, Serkrant decided to eliminate the Domper himself and ordered his soldiers to attack the boy. However, Vandalieu easily made the ground beneath their feet collapse, but Serkrant was unaffected and called it pointless. Seeing Vandalieu and Eleonora inside a magical barrier, Eleonora wondered why he had saved her. Vandalieu explained that he simply stopped considering her an enemy the moment she lost her killing intent. Serkrant ordered his subordinates to eliminate Vandalieu, but before they could, his arm was chopped off by Borkus, who had appeared just in time. While Eleonora was impressed that Borkus had been tamed by the boy, Vandalieu ordered his undead Tyranno-zombie eliminate the remaining vampires, leaving Serkrant as the last one standing. An enraged Serkrant gathered his energy and attacked Vandalieu, but he blocked it with a magical shield. Even more furious, Serkrant decided to charge forward with his sharp claws, saying he would kill Vandalieu just as he had killed his father. As Serkrant tried to break through the barrier, Vandalieu demanded that he confirm whether he was the one who killed his father. Serkrant admitted it, adding that he would make Vandalieu suffer a fate even worse than his father's. Serkrant lunged toward the boy, but Vandalieu blew his arm off, and declared that the one who took something precious from him didn't deserve to die and be reborn. Using magic, Vandalieu pulled Serkrant's soul right out of his body, and as a punishment for making his mother cry by killing his father, Vandalieu burned his soul to cinders, until nothing was left, and then crushed it.